The small, time-worn wooden sign appeared in front of her. "Welcome to Blue Water." Avery sighed, trying to mentally prepare herself for what lay ahead. The town was simple, with white houses and cobblestone streets, almost like a painting from an old book. She parked the car in front of her grandmother's house, a modest wooden structure that had stood the test of time, with a porch offering a perfect view of the sea. But the years had been harsh on the house, and it was in urgent need of care. As she got out of the car, Avery felt a wave of emotions wash over her. The last time she had been there was when she was only 10 years old, visiting her grandmother during summer vacation. Nostalgia hit her hard, mixed with a feeling of being lost. The memories were sweet, but the reason for her visit couldn't be more bitter. She was running away, with no other option but to isolate herself in a place where no one knew her, where she could breathe and try to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. She grabbed her bags from the trunk and walked to the front door, which creaked as it opened. The inside of the house was dark and dusty, with furniture covered by white sheets. The smell of mildew was almost comforting, as if everything was exactly as she remembered, frozen in time. Leaving her bags on the living room floor, Avery walked to the large window overlooking the sea. The sound of the waves crashing on the beach below was soothing, almost hypnotic. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to disconnect from New York, from the tabloids, and the cruel gossip that had dragged her to rock bottom. As she took a deep breath, she heard footsteps outside. Her heart raced for a second, but she quickly calmed down when she realized it was just a man across the street, carrying boxes from an old truck. He looked at her for a brief moment, and their eyes met. Avery noticed he was tall, with a short beard and disheveled hair, wearing simple, worn-out clothes. He had a casual demeanor, but seemed tired, as if carrying the weight of something larger. Avery quickly looked away, feeling uncomfortable with the silent exchange. Shifting her attention away from the man, she began to explore the house. Every room brought back memories of her childhood, the smell of fresh bread baking, lazy afternoons on the couch while her grandmother told stories. Now, everything was quiet and empty, but Avery was determined to turn the space into a refuge, far from the chaos she had left behind. After a few minutes, her phone vibrated, pulling her back to reality. A message from her brother, Ethan, appeared on the screen. "Did you get there okay? Are you sure this is the right thing to do?" She sighed and quickly typed a response. "Yes, I'm fine. I just need some time for myself." She knew he was worried, but deep down, Ethan would never fully understand why she needed this time away from everything and everyone. The scandal in New York had destroyed her. The betrayal by her boss and the failure of a multi-million-dollar project had turned her into the media's target, painting her as the villain in a story she hadn't even chosen to be part of. Fleeing to Blue Water was her only choice, at least until the dust settled. Avery decided it would be best to start organizing the house. She went upstairs where the bedrooms were located. When she opened her grandmother's closet, she smelled something familiar, as if the years hadn't passed. As she rummaged through the drawers, she found something she didn't expect: an old photograph folded in the middle, showing her grandmother as a young woman standing next to a man she didn't recognize. They were standing in front of the same house she was in now, smiling as if nothing in the world could shake their happiness. Avery frowned. Who was that man? The question bothered her, but for now, she put the photo back in the drawer, determined to investigate later. It was late afternoon when she decided to take a walk to the town center to buy something for dinner. Walking through the streets of Blue Water, she noticed how everything seemed both the same and different at the same time. The shops and restaurants were simple, with wooden signs and colorful facades. The air was filled with friendly voices and the sounds of laughter coming from the bars. It was a stark contrast to the fast-paced, impersonal life of New York. She entered a small grocery store, where an elderly woman with white hair was at the counter. The woman looked at her curiously, as if trying to remember if she had seen her before. "You must be new around here," the lady said with a kind smile. Avery smiled back, a little nervously. "Yeah, sort of. My grandmother used to spend summers here. Now, I'm living in her house." The woman nodded. "Ah, you must be Margaret's granddaughter, right? She was a wonderful woman. We all miss her around here." The comment caught Avery by surprise. She had never known that her grandmother had left such a strong mark on the town. "Yes, that's me. I just hope I can fit in as well as she did." The woman smiled. "Don't worry, dear. Blue Water has a way of welcoming those who need a fresh start." Thanking her for the help, Avery left the market with a few bags and started walking back to the house, thinking about the woman's words. A fresh start. That was exactly what she needed. However, she had no idea that the secrets her grandmother had left behind would bring more questions than answers. When she was about to turn the corner back to her street, a truck drove past her. The same man she had seen that morning was behind the wheel, and this time he stopped next to her, lowering the window. "You must be the new tenant at the Bennett house," he said with a faint smile. "I've heard about you." Avery stopped, surprised by the direct approach. "Yes, I'm Avery. And you are?" "Liam Harper. I've lived here for quite a while," he replied, his voice calm, but carrying a tone she couldn't quite decipher. "If you need help with the house, I'm a go-to guy around here. Anything that needs fixing, just let me know." She smiled politely, but something in his gaze made her hesitate. There was an intensity there, something that seemed to hide more than he was saying. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." Liam nodded and started the truck, disappearing down the narrow street. Avery stood there for a moment, watching the truck fade into the horizon. Something about that man intrigued her, but she couldn't tell if it was his laid-back demeanor or the fact that he had looked at her as if he knew something she didn't. Back at the house, dusk was setting in, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Avery looked out at the sea, trying to calm her mind and focus on the next steps. She needed to concentrate on herself, on healing the wounds New York had left behind. But the feeling that there was something more, something she didn't fully understand, began to nag at her. As she entered the house, the photograph she had found earlier came back to her mind. Who was the man next to her grandmother? And why did she feel that the answer to that question might change everything? The night was slowly falling, and the sense that the past was about to resurface like a rising tide left her uneasy. Avery woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows of her grandmother's house. The day was bright and warm, a contrast to the emotional coldness she had felt since arriving in Blue Water. As she got out of bed, she noticed the house was still quiet, almost as if time inside didn't follow the same rules as outside. She walked downstairs, feeling the familiar creak of the wooden steps beneath her feet. She made a simple cup of coffee and sat on the porch, trying to get used to the idea that this was her new home, at least for a while. The sea, always present in the background, offered a calm and constant rhythm that she began to find somewhat comforting. Even so, the feeling of being lost and without purpose still haunted her. Was it possible to find some kind of peace here? Or was she just hiding from a problem that would inevitably come back to haunt her? Before her mind could get completely lost in thought, the sound of footsteps on the street caught her attention. Looking up, she saw Liam again. He was walking down the sidewalk with a tool belt around his waist and a cap pulled low over his head, apparently on his way to some job. When he saw her, he waved casually, not stopping. "Good morning," he said as he passed in front of the house. Avery waved back, hesitant. "Good morning." She wasn't quite sure what to think of Liam. There was something about him that intrigued her, but also something that made her wary. Maybe it was his mysterious demeanor, or the way he seemed so at ease in the town, as if he knew everything and everyone around him. After a morning of tidying up the house, Avery decided it was time to face reality and start making the repairs the house so desperately needed. It was clear that this wouldn't be a simple task, but at least it would keep her mind occupied. As she approached the porch to examine the roof, which was in urgent need of repair, she heard a familiar voice. "Gonna try fixing that on your own?" She turned and saw Liam, leaning against the front gate, his eyes squinting against the sun. He looked almost amused, as if he were watching a scene he had seen many times before. Avery let out a frustrated sigh, realizing she didn't even know where to start. "I was thinking about trying, but it seems more complicated than I imagined." Liam took a few steps forward, crossing the small fence that separated the house from the street. "Those beams are rotten. If you try messing with it without knowing what you're doing, you could end up hurting someone or yourself." That last comment bothered her more than it should have. Avery wasn't used to depending on others. In New York, she had always handled everything on her own. But here, in Blue Water, everything seemed harder, as if the universe was determined to remind her that even far from the spotlight, there were still challenges. "If you want, I can help," he continued, as if the idea of her trying on her own was absurd. "I can come back after work. It won't take long." She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should accept the help or insist on doing it herself. There was a tension in the air between them, something she couldn't ignore. Since their first meeting, there was something about Liam that stirred her. The attraction, as much as she tried to suppress it, was real. I'd appreciate the help," she finally said, reluctantly. "I think this is beyond what I can handle." Liam just nodded, without any arrogance or insistence. "I'll finish my work in a few hours and come by." The day dragged on as Avery tried to find ways to keep herself busy. But the truth was the anxiety over Liam's return was starting to build. She didn't know why she felt so restless. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't know much about him, except for what Nora had mentioned in passing at the market. He was the town's handyman, always around, but seemed to keep a certain distance from people, as if he preferred to be helpful without getting too involved. As the afternoon began to give way to dusk, Avery once again heard the familiar footsteps on the porch. When she opened the door, she found Liam there, as calm and casual as before, but this time carrying a ladder and a toolbox bigger than the belt he had been wearing earlier. "Ready to get started?" he asked, already walking toward the roof without waiting for a response. Avery followed him, trying to suppress the feeling of discomfort that always arose whenever he was around. He climbed the ladder with agility, inspecting the damage to the roof with experienced eyes. She moved a little closer, watching him work. There was something hypnotic about the way he moved with confidence, as if every hammer strike, every adjustment had been made hundreds of times before. "Do you always do this?" she asked, trying to break the silence. Fix things for other people?" Liam looked down, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. "I do what needs to be done. In a small town like this, people always need help, so I help." She nodded, even though his answer didn't fully satisfy her. There was something more to that story, but he clearly wasn't willing to share. For a while, they worked in silence, the sound of hammers and screws filling the space between them. But the silence between two people can be both comforting and unsettling. And with Liam, it seemed to be both at the same time. When he finally finished, the sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "All done," he said, climbing down the ladder with a slight smile. "That should hold for now, but you'll need to replace some parts of the roof soon." "Thank you," Avery replied, trying to sound natural. "I really appreciate the help." He began to pack up the tools, and silence settled in again. There was something more to be said. Avery could feel it, but the words seemed stuck between them. When he was about to leave, she called out to him, almost without thinking. "Liam?" He stopped, turning to face her. His eyes were dark under the twilight, but there was a softness there, something she hadn't noticed before. I wanted to thank you again. I wouldn't have been able to do this alone." Liam just nodded, but there was something different in his expression now. He took a step closer, and Avery felt the air around her grow heavier. Not in an oppressive way, but rather filled with a tension that made her feel every heartbeat. "You'll get used to it," he said softly. "This town, the people, it's not as bad as it seems at first." Avery was surprised by the gentleness in his voice. She had always seen him as distant, but in that moment there was something different, a vulnerability he rarely showed. "I hope so," she replied, feeling a small spark of connection. And then, for a moment, their eyes locked, and Avery almost thought he was going to say something more, something important. But before he could say anything, Liam gave a half smile and turned, walking away. As he disappeared down the dark street, Avery stood there, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. There was something about Liam, something that stirred her in a way no other man had. But there was also a barrier, a wall he put up between them that she wasn't sure if she wanted to or could tear down. The following days passed in a blur. Avery tried to adjust to life in Blue Water, making small trips to the market, fixing up the house, and trying to forget the chaos of New York. But whenever she thought she was starting to feel at peace, Liam would appear, whether at the market, on the beach, or simply crossing her path in town. These repeated encounters left her uneasy. It seemed like fate was trying to say something, as if the town was purposefully throwing them together. Every time they saw each other, the tension grew, along with a mutual curiosity. Avery felt like she wanted to know more about him, but at the same time, she was afraid of getting too involved, afraid of what she might discover about him and about herself. That morning, at the market, they crossed paths again. This time, Liam was helping to carry boxes into the store. When he saw her, he paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on her before he returned to work. The interaction was brief, but the impact lingered with Avery for the rest of the day. With each encounter, the tension grew, but neither of them seemed willing to take the next step. There were too many questions in the air, too many unresolved mysteries, both about Blue Water and about their pasts. What was Liam hiding? And why did Avery feel so drawn to him, even when she knew it was safer to keep her distance? The answers didn't come easily, but what was undeniable, however, was that something was about to change. And when it did, Avery knew it wouldn't just be in her life, it would be in everything she thought she knew about herself and about the small town she now called home. The afternoon in Blue Water dragged lazily as Avery watched the sea from her grandmother's porch. The sound of waves crashing in the distance mingled with the thoughts swirling in her mind. She tried to focus on the repairs, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Liam. Since he began helping her, their encounters had become more frequent. What had once been a tension filled with strangeness and distance had now transformed into something closer, almost intimate. The past few days had been filled with small moments that seemed insignificant at first glance, but carried with them a growing sense of connection. Superficial conversations at first, but gradually deepening as they both allowed themselves to share more. Avery, who had always been reserved, especially after everything that had happened in New York, found herself increasingly comfortable around Liam. Something about the way he spoke direct, with no pretense, but with an almost disarming calmness, made her want to trust him. That afternoon, they had arranged to continue the repairs in the attic, a place Avery had yet to fully explore. When Liam arrived, greeting her with his usual brief smile, the silence between them seemed to have changed. It was no longer uncomfortable. There was a mutual understanding that something was developing between them, even if neither was willing to verbalize what it was. "So, ready to check out the attic?" Liam asked, tossing a wrench into his tool belt as he looked up at the ceiling of the house. "The structure looks fine, but it's best we take a look before we start making repairs." Avery nodded, leading him to the stairs that went up to the small space above. They climbed in silence, the air between them heavier than before. When they reached the top, Liam began inspecting the area while she distracted herself by watching his agile movements. He seemed so at ease with any task he undertook, and that attracted her in a way she was still trying to understand. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended, as if hesitant to interrupt his focus. "It'll take some work, but nothing we can't handle," he replied, kneeling down to check the floorboards. "But for now, you should avoid walking too much up here. It could be dangerous until we reinforce it." Avery laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension she felt. "I've already figured out that repairs are my strong suit. I think I'll follow your advice." Liam stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans, and for a moment, their eyes met again. This time, the intensity of the moment was impossible to ignore. The silence seemed to stretch, both of them aware of their proximity in the small, stuffy attic. Avery felt her heart race, her breathing becoming slightly heavier. She realized she was standing on the edge between maintaining the safe distance she had imposed on herself since arriving or crossing it completely. That's when the unexpected happened. Distracted, Avery took a wrong step on a floorboard Liam had mentioned earlier. The creak was audible, followed by a dry crack. Before she could process what was happening, the wood gave way beneath her weight, and she fell to her knees, trying to regain her balance. Liam moved quickly, his arms wrapping around her almost instinctively, pulling her away from the dangerous spot. She gasped, the scare making her heart race even more. I'm okay," she said, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Careful," he murmured, his voice closer than she expected. "I told you it was dangerous." The proximity between them was undeniable now. Liam still held her, and Avery could feel the warmth radiating from him, the light scent of what mixed with the salt of the sea. The touch wasn't just protective. There was something deeper there, something both of them felt. For a second, neither of them moved. Liam's arm remained firm around Avery's waist, while his eyes, locked on hers, conveyed an intensity she had never seen before. "Sorry," she murmured, finally pulling back, though part of her wished otherwise. "I should have paid more attention." Liam let go of her, though the movement was slow, as if he wasn't in a hurry to break the contact either. "It's my fault. I should have reinforced the floor before you came up here." His voice, usually so steady, was softer now, almost vulnerable. Avery tried to regain control of the situation, but she could feel that something had changed between them. That moment of vulnerability, where she had been hurt and he had held her, made it clear that the wall they had both carefully maintained was beginning to crumble. "Let me take a look at your knee," Liam suddenly said, breaking the silence with a gentle authority. Before Avery could protest, he was already kneeling in front of her, lifting the hem of her jeans to examine where she had fallen. The pain wasn't intense, but the impact had left a small scrape. Avery watched silently as Liam inspected the injury with a concentration she had never seen before. He was careful, the soft touch of his fingers on her skin sending involuntary shivers through her body. "It's fine," he said, finally standing up. "Nothing serious, but you should put some ice on it to avoid swelling." She nodded, still feeling his touch on her skin even after he had pulled away. The warmth of his hands lingered, as did the sense that the brief moment between them meant something more. "Thank you," Avery said quietly, trying to find some normalcy. But Liam just looked at her, and in that moment, there was a silent understanding between them. Something that didn't need to be said, but that they both knew. They descended from the attic in silence. Avery went to the kitchen, where she grabbed a cloth and filled it with ice, following Liam's advice. When she returned, she found him still in the living room, packing up his tools. She sat down on the couch, pressing the ice to her knee, but she couldn't shake the thoughts that continued to circle in her mind. The silence between them now felt different. It was no longer the awkwardness of before, but rather something that hinted that a change was about to happen. Liam, for his part, stopped in the middle of the room, as if hesitating about what to do next. He looked at Avery for a long moment before speaking. "You seem like you're running from something," he said suddenly, his voice low but firm. "Since the day I first saw you here, I've noticed that. And it's clear it's not just the roof." Avery shifted on the couch, surprised by the directness of his observation. "You have no idea what I'm going through," she replied, trying to shield herself from something she knew, deep down, he was right about. "Maybe not," he admitted, taking a step toward her. "But that doesn't mean I can't see what's eating away at you. I've seen that kind of pain before." His voice had a weight that Avery couldn't ignore. Something in Liam's words touched a sensitive spot inside her, something she had been trying to avoid since she arrived in Blue Water. The barriers she had built were beginning to crumble, and part of her wanted to let them. She wanted to allow herself to feel, to trust. "You're right," she whispered, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. "I'm running, but I don't know how long I can keep doing that." Liam nodded, as if he understood completely. He took another step, now standing in front of her, his gaze steady and full of a quiet understanding. "I was running too when I came here," he said, the words heavy with a truth that seemed difficult for him to admit. "Blue Water has a way of drawing in people who need a break or a fresh start." Avery looked at him, feeling a deeper connection growing. What she saw in Liam wasn't just the calm, competent man who fixed things around town, but someone who carried a pain similar to hers. Perhaps, more than anything, it was that which drew them to each other. The silence stretched again, but now there was a different weight to it, one that pulled them toward each other. Before she could think about what she was doing, Avery stood up, the ice falling from her knee, and faced Liam. He didn't move away, and their eyes were locked on each other, as if they had been waiting for this moment all along. She felt his breath close, warm and steady, and for the first time since her life had fallen apart, Avery felt like she had found someone who understood her pain, someone willing to be there for her. And before she could stop herself, Liam's hand gently slid across hers, the touch so light but filled with meaning. The first true touch of affection, unhurried and without hesitation. A touch that said more than any words could. Night had fallen over Blue Water, bringing with it a gentle breeze that made the tree branches sway lightly. Avery stood on the porch of the house, feeling the cool ocean air as she gazed at the sky dotted with stars. The tranquility of the town seemed, in moments like this, almost surreal. After the events of the past few days, she felt increasingly connected to Liam, but that connection came with a growing restlessness. The subtle touch between them in the attic had stirred something within her, something she couldn't ignore. The beach was just a few steps away, and the sound of the waves called to her. She felt the need for a moment to clear her mind, so without thinking too much, she put on her shoes and walked down toward the sand. The darkness enveloped the town peacefully, with the lights from the houses in the distance resembling stars scattered around the bay. What had initially seemed like just a refuge was becoming something more. But Avery still didn't know exactly what it meant to her. Reaching the beach, the salty wind tousled her hair, and she took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She walked slowly, letting her feet sink into the cool sand. The sky was clear, the stars shining with an intensity she rarely saw in New York. The vastness of the ocean before her seemed to mirror her own inner confusion, vast, unknown, yet irresistibly compelling. As she walked, she noticed a figure in the distance sitting near the shoreline. Her heart raced when she realized who it was. Even from afar, there was no mistaking that profile. It was Liam. The idea of seeing him there, so unexpectedly, made her feel uneasy. For a moment, she thought about turning back, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the fact that, deep down, she knew she needed this conversation. She needed to understand what was happening between them, what she felt, and what Liam represented for her. Avery walked over to him, her steps slowing as she approached. Liam was sitting in the sand, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if lost in his own thoughts. When he heard her footsteps, he turned slowly, and their eyes met under the soft light of the moon. He didn't seem surprised to see her, as if he had known, somehow, that this encounter would happen. "You're here," he said, his voice low and calm, but with a hint of surprise. "I needed some air," Avery replied, sitting beside him, letting the initial silence settle between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the waves gently breaking filled the space, and Avery felt a strange peace in that shared silence. "I come here to think," Liam finally said, breaking the silence, his voice sounding like a confession. "When things get complicated," she nodded, looking out at the ocean stretching ahead of them. "I understand. It seems like a good place for that." They sat like that for a while, side by side, not touching but close enough to feel each other's presence. It was as if the attraction between them had become tangible, an invisible force connecting them, even when no words were spoken. But Avery knew she couldn't keep ignoring the signs. The silence, though comfortable, didn't answer the questions that had been circling her mind since the day Liam had helped her in the attic. And now, there on that deserted beach, it felt like the right time to confront those doubts. "Liam," she began, her voice hesitant, as if unsure how to express what she was feeling. "It's been strange, hasn't it? All of this." Liam turned his gaze away from the sea and looked at her, his dark eyes illuminated by the soft glow of the stars. He didn't answer right away, as if he was considering what to say, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with meaning, with everything that had yet to be said. "Yes," he finally responded, his voice firm but gentle. "It's strange, and at the same time, it feels right somehow, even though I can't explain it." Avery felt the weight of his words and realized that she wasn't alone in the confusion of feelings she had been experiencing. There was something between them, something strong enough to be felt, even if neither of them fully wanted to acknowledge it. She took a deep breath, trying to find the best way to put her own thoughts into words. "Since I arrived here," she began, looking at the ocean again, "I've been trying to understand what I'm doing. Trying to figure out why I ran away from New York and why I ended up coming back to this town I barely know. And then I met you, and everything got more confusing. I feel like She stopped, the words feeling inadequate. Liam didn't interrupt, allowing her to find her own path. When Avery looked at him again, she saw the patience in his eyes, a quiet understanding she wasn't used to finding in other people. "I don't know what I'm doing either," Liam said, his voice low, almost as if admitting it for the first time. "I came to Blue Water to escape, to try and leave my past behind. But you make everything I thought I'd buried resurface." Liam's confession took Avery by surprise. She had always known there was something more behind his calm and distant facade, but hearing it in his own words made her feel something deeper. He, like her, was running from something, and, in a way, that's what connected them. They both carried wounds they were trying to hide, and now those wounds seemed intertwined. "I didn't want this to happen," she whispered, not sure exactly what she was confessing. "But I can't help it. I can't stop thinking about you." Liam looked at her, his gaze intense but filled with a vulnerability she had never seen in him before. And then, slowly, he reached out, not touching her directly, but close enough for her to feel the warmth of his skin. Avery's heart raced, knowing exactly what that gesture meant. There was a choice to be made right there in that moment. For an instant, everything around them seemed to disappear: the sound of the sea, the gentle wind, the stars. It was just her and Liam, the whole world focusing on that single moment. He leaned in slightly, his eyes locked on hers, as if waiting for a sign. Avery couldn't move, her mind torn between the desire to go forward and the fear of losing herself again. Liam paused, just inches away from her, his gaze filled with something she knew he was trying to control. The almost kiss lingered in the air, so close that she could feel the warmth of his breath, the magnetism between them intensifying. But then, at the last moment, Avery pulled back, her heart racing and her thoughts in turmoil. She knew she couldn't do this. "Not now. I can't," she said, her voice thick with a mix of emotions. "Not yet." Liam remained still for a moment, his eyes still on hers, but he didn't try to force the moment. Instead, he slowly stepped back, respecting the space she needed. Avery felt a mix of relief and frustration. She wanted this. She wanted to give in to what she felt for him, but something was holding her back. Something from her past, something she wasn't ready to face yet. "It's okay," Liam said softly, his voice steady but understanding. "I get it." She looked at him, feeling a mix of gratitude and guilt for stepping away. But Liam didn't seem disappointed, at least not outwardly. Instead, he simply gave her a small smile, one that conveyed more understanding than words could. Avery stood up slowly, feeling the cold sand under her feet. The wind now seemed stronger, more biting, and she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill and the internal confusion consuming her. Liam remained seated, looking out at the sea, his presence still heavy with something unspoken, something that still needed to be resolved. "Good night, Liam," she said softly, taking a few steps back. "Good night, Avery," he replied, his tone warm and gentle, but laden with deeper meaning. Avery turned and began walking back to the house, feeling her heart heavy. She knew there was something there, something growing between them, but the past still had its claws sunk deep into her mind. She needed to deal with that before she could allow herself to move forward. And for the first time, as she walked away from Liam on that beach, she realized that maybe she was willing to face everything that haunted her. But not yet. Not tonight. The morning in Blue Water was bright, with the sun illuminating the quiet streets of the small town. Avery watched from the living room window as the wind gently swayed the trees in the yard. The distant sound of waves breaking was comforting, but her mind was restless, spinning around the events of the previous night. The encounter with Liam on the beach still haunted her, the feeling of the almost kiss, the tension between them, and her decision to pull away at the last moment. It left her confused and vulnerable. A part of her wanted to give in to what she felt, but fear of what it could mean held her back. She knew Liam would be coming today to finish the repairs on the house, and the thought of seeing him again already had her on edge. Avery was trying to mentally prepare herself, but nothing seemed enough to calm the whirlwind of emotions between them. When she heard Liam's truck pull up outside, her heart raced. She looked at the door for a moment, took a deep breath, and tried to seem natural before opening it. There he was, with the same calm expression as always, but there was something different in his eyes. Something more intense, as if he too had been processing what happened on the beach. "Good morning," he said, with a slight nod. "Good morning," Avery replied, a bit hesitant. They exchanged a brief look, heavy with unspoken words, before Liam headed toward the repairs on the porch. For a while, they worked in silence. Avery didn't know what to say, and Liam, for his part, seemed focused on finishing what he'd started, as if the tension between them wasn't hanging over every second. But inevitably, the repressed emotions began to build up. "So about last night?" Avery began, trying to break the ice. Liam paused for a second, taking a deep breath before turning to face her. "What about it?" The question was so direct that it caught her off guard. He seemed calm, but there was something in his posture that indicated he was also dealing with the same internal confusion. "I don't really know how to talk about it," she admitted, crossing her arms defensively. "Maybe there's not much to say," Liam replied, turning back to adjust the wood on the porch, as if trying to focus on the work rather than the feelings clearly lingering between them. His response, so direct and seemingly indifferent, stirred something inside Avery. She moved closer, not thinking much, feeling the urge to resolve whatever this was between them once and for all. "What do you mean? There's not much to say. Are we just going to pretend nothing happened?" Her voice rose slightly, surprising her, but not enough to stop. "Are you going to act like there's nothing between us?" Liam dropped his tools and faced her, his once calm expression now showing a mix of frustration and something deeper. "Avery, I'm not pretending nothing happened, but you're clearly hesitating, and I'm not going to push anything. If you're not ready, I respect that." His voice was firm, but there was a hint of pain behind his words, something Avery couldn't ignore. But instead of calming her, it only made her anger grow. Anger at herself, at her confusion, and at how he seemed to understand everything while she felt lost. "It's not that simple," she responded, now standing closer, her eyes flashing. "You think you understand everything I'm going through, but you don't. You don't know what it's like to watch your life fall apart and be powerless to stop it. You think I don't know what it's like to lose everything?" Liam shot back, his voice deeper now. "You think I'm here in this small town living a simple life because I chose it?" The implicit accusation in his words made her step back for a moment, but before she could say anything, Liam continued. "I know what it's like to lose," he said, his anger still evident, but now there was pain in his voice. "I know what it's like to run. I know what it's like to try and hide from the past. Avery." She fell silent, surprised by the intensity of his response. But something in his words hit her deeply. He wasn't just talking about a simple life or easy choices. There was more to it, something he was also hiding, and for the first time, she realized that he carried his own wounds. They were more alike than she had imagined. Liam ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm himself. "I don't know what you want me to do," he said, his voice lower now. "I can't be the guy who fixes you. I can't be the guy who solves your problems. But what I can be is someone who's here, willing to know you, willing to stand by your side if you let me." Avery felt her throat tighten. His words, so honest and direct, completely disarmed her. She didn't know what to say. For days, she had tried to avoid opening up, tried to protect herself. But here was Liam, laying everything bare, showing that despite his own pain, he was willing to try. Avery started, but her voice faltered. She didn't know how to respond. Everything she had been afraid to admit was now exposed, and it terrified her. Liam took a step back, shaking his head. "If you're not ready, that's okay. I'll finish what I came to do, and we can go on with our lives as before." But the disappointment was clear on his face, even as he tried to mask it. It was in that moment that Avery realized how much she wanted him, how much that connection, no matter how frightening, meant to her. And before she could think twice, she stepped toward him, the words still stuck in her throat, but the impulse stronger than any rational thought. The frustration, the anger, and the undeniable attraction exploded in an instant as Avery grabbed Liam by the shirt and pulled him close. The kiss that followed was intense, filled with all the repressed emotion between them. His lips were warm, and the way he held her in response made all her hesitation disappear for a moment. There were no more doubts, no more fears, just their touch, the deep connection, and the desire they could no longer ignore. For a brief moment, everything felt right. The world around them vanished, and they were just two bodies connecting, sharing the same pain and the same need. But then, as if reality struck her abruptly, Avery pulled back. Her heart was racing, her breath shallow, and Liam's eyes, full of surprise and confusion, were fixed on her. She took a few steps back, the shock of what had just happened beginning to take over her body. I can't, she whispered, feeling the weight of the words as if she were apologizing to herself as much as to him. Liam stood still, breathing heavily, still trying to process what had happened. Avery, he tried to say something, but she cut him off, her voice trembling with emotion. I'm sorry, she repeated, louder this time. I can't do this. She turned before he could say anything else, her chest tight with the mix of feelings overwhelming her. Avery felt the fear rising inside her, a fear not just of getting involved with Liam, but of being hurt again, of reliving everything that had happened in New York. Liam stayed where he was, watching as she walked away, her steps quick and determined, but filled with an obvious sadness. He didn't know what else he could have done. As much as he wanted to understand her, it seemed like every time they got close, Avery pulled back even more. The sound of the waves in the distance now seemed further away, as if the world had changed in a matter of seconds. And maybe it had, but not in the way he had hoped. The air in Bluewater was filled with a light energy that afternoon as the townsfolk prepared for the much-anticipated seaside ball. Lights were being strung along the streets and on the pier, and excited voices echoed through the town. For Avery, however, the festive atmosphere felt at odds with the turmoil she was feeling inside. The argument and kiss with Liam still spun in her mind a mix of regret and desire she didn't know how to process. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple but flattering dress she had chosen to wear. Nora had stopped by earlier, insisting she attend the ball. It'll do you good to get out, relax, and meet more people in town, Nora had said with a warm smile. Avery, hesitant at first, had eventually given in. She knew that if she stayed home, her mind would keep circling back to Liam, and that was the last thing she wanted. Even so, as she looked at herself in the mirror, she couldn't ignore the nervousness rising inside her. She knew Liam would be there. Bluewater was too small of a town for them not to cross paths at such a big event. She didn't know how to handle the inevitability of that meeting, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that she wanted to see him, even if the idea terrified her. When she arrived at the event, Avery was greeted by a stunning sight. The ball was set up along the beach, with twinkling lights strung over tables and the dance floor, and the sound of music filling the air. The atmosphere was warm and familiar, something she hadn't experienced since she arrived in town. Nora was at the entrance, greeting everyone as they arrived, and when she saw Avery, her smile widened. "You look beautiful, dear. I'm so glad you came," Nora said, giving her a light hug. "Enjoy the night, relax. It's a party. Don't let those thoughts weigh you down." Avery smiled, grateful for Nora's kindness. She was right. Avery needed a light-hearted evening, something to pull her away from all the tension that had been building up inside her. Trying to take the suggestion to heart, she ventured into the party, greeting a few people she'd already met around town. But even with the lively music and cheerful conversations around her, her mind was divided. When she finally saw him, it was as if time paused for a moment. Liam stood on the other side of the event, chatting with a few locals. He wore a simple shirt, yet Avery found him incredibly attractive. His relaxed posture contrasted with the storm she knew he carried inside. It was as if he was at peace, while she battled with her own thoughts. For a moment, their eyes met, and her stomach flipped. He quickly looked away, but that brief contact was enough to stir a whirlwind of emotions inside her. She tried to distract herself, forcing conversations with others, laughing at Nora's jokes, but every step she took, every movement, she felt Liam's presence, even when he wasn't looking at her. That silent game bothered her, but at the same time, It made her feel alive in a way she couldn't explain. "You seem a bit lost," a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Avery turned and was met with a familiar face, Ethan, her brother, smiling with the usual charm of someone who was used to being in control of every situation. "Ethan?" The surprise in her voice was evident. She hadn't expected to see him there, and his sudden appearance left her disoriented. "What are you doing here?" Avery asked, trying to hide her confusion and slight annoyance. Ethan never visited without warning, and his presence felt out of place. "I wanted to see how my sister's doing, of course. And check out this town you've decided to call home for a while," he replied, his eyes scanning the environment, already passing silent judgment on every detail. Avery knew Ethan had always been protective, but there was something more behind his presence. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she sensed a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Still, she tried to act normally. "I'm fine, Ethan. You didn't need to worry," she said, forcing a smile. "Of course I worry. You disappeared without much explanation, and after everything that happened." He left the sentence hanging, but Avery knew exactly what he meant. He was referring to New York, to the scandal, to everything she had been trying to escape from. Before she could respond, though, she noticed Ethan's gaze shift to the other side of the event, where Liam now stood, watching them from afar. Ethan's face hardened, and Avery immediately knew that he had sensed the tension between her and Liam. "Who's that?" Ethan asked, his tone subtly shifting. Avery hesitated for a second, knowing that whatever answer she gave Ethan would only increase his suspicion. "Just a friend. He's been helping me with the house." Ethan narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced. "Oh, really? Just a friend?" Irritation started to bubble up inside her. She didn't want to deal with Ethan's overprotectiveness tonight, not when she was already dealing with her own emotions. "Yes, Ethan. Just a friend," she replied, trying to sound firm. But the tension was palpable, and Ethan clearly didn't believe her. Avery felt the weight of Liam's distant gaze, and the discomfort in her posture made her want to leave as quickly as possible. Ethan, however, didn't seem inclined to let it go. "I don't know, Avery. Something tells me he's more than that. And frankly, I don't like the guy." Before she could respond, Liam began walking over, his steps slow and deliberate, as if he had sensed the change in atmosphere. When he finally reached them, the silence between the three of them was tense. Avery knew the last thing she wanted was a scene, but she didn't know how to prevent it. "Liam," Ethan said, his name rolling off his tongue with a hint of challenge. "Seems like you've been spending a lot of time with my sister." Liam kept his expression calm, but Avery could see the discomfort in his eyes. "Just helping with repairs around the house." Avery felt her nerves spike as she watched the two men exchange looks. Ethan's tone was clearly protective, while Liam remained composed, but aware of the situation. "Ethan, this isn't necessary," she tried to intervene, placing a gentle hand on her brother's arm, hoping he would recognize the intensity of the moment and back off. "Everything's fine." But instead of backing down, Ethan crossed his arms and turned to Avery. "I just want to make sure you're making good decisions here, Avery. I don't want you to get hurt again." His words hit her hard, like a veiled reprimand. Avery felt the heat rise in her body, anger mixing with frustration. She knew he was trying to protect her, but the way he was handling the situation was suffocating. "I'm an adult, Ethan," she said, her voice firmer than she intended. "I can take care of myself." Liam, sensing the growing tension, took a step back. "Maybe I should let you two talk." But before he could leave, Avery turned to him, her expression a mix of emotions. "Liam, no. Stay." Their eyes met again, and something silent passed between them. Ethan, however, clearly wasn't happy with the situation, and the night, which was supposed to be light and festive, was quickly turning into something uncomfortable. Avery knew she had to find a way to balance things, but all she could think about was the pressure she felt from all sides: Ethan, Liam, and even from herself. The ball continued around them, but for Avery, the only thing that mattered in that moment was dealing with the chaos forming right there, on the beach illuminated by the moon and the twinkling lights of the party. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves was soft, almost soothing, as Liam stood in front of Avery's house. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. He wasn't sure how she would react to his proposal, but he was determined. After the tension at the town ball and the confrontation with her brother, something inside Liam had shifted. He couldn't keep watching Avery pull away from him, as if she was constantly battling something they both knew was inevitable. The previous day had been a whirlwind, and Ethan's presence had only widened the distance between him and Avery. Liam knew she was running not just from him, but from herself, from her feelings, from the past that haunted her. But he also knew he didn't want to stand on the sidelines of that fight anymore. There was something deep and real between them, and if she wasn't ready to face it, he was. He knocked on the door, once, twice, waiting to hear her footsteps. When the door finally opened, Avery appeared, her hair slightly tousled and her expression confused, as if she hadn't expected visitors so early. "Liam?" Her voice was soft, filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I need to talk to you. About yesterday, about everything, really." Avery stared at him for a moment, clearly hesitant. She could see the seriousness in his eyes, and something inside her knew this conversation was important. But fear still held her back from opening up completely. Still, she stepped aside, allowing him space to come in. But Liam shook his head. "Actually, I don't want to talk here. I want to take you somewhere. Spend the day with you. Just us." The proposal was so unexpected that Avery didn't know how to respond at first. She looked at him for a moment, feeling her heart race. The idea of spending the entire day with him seemed risky. The closeness she would inevitably feel scared her. But at the same time, there was something comforting about the idea of exploring Blue Water with Liam, seeing him in a lighter, more relaxed environment away from all the tension and conflict that had dominated the past few days. "Liam," she began, but he cut her off. "I know it's an unexpected proposal, and I know you have your reservations, but Avery, you need to stop running. From us, from yourself. Just give me a chance. One day. No thinking about what happened before. No worrying about what might come after." She was silent for a moment, weighing the sincerity in his eyes. There was something about Liam's posture, the way he was looking at her, that made her want to say yes. Maybe it was his determination, or the fact that deep down, she knew she couldn't keep running forever. Either way, she felt her defenses starting to crumble. "All right," she finally said, surprising herself as much as him. "One day." Liam smiled, relieved, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "Great, let's go. I've got everything planned." Without further delay, he led her to his truck, and they drove toward the coastline. During the ride, the conversation flowed easily. He took her to a more secluded part of town, where the scenery changed dramatically. The cliffs rose ahead, with a vibrant blue sea crashing against the rocks below. It was a place of wild beauty where few people went. Avery found herself admiring the landscape, feeling the fresh wind on her face and the lightness the environment brought. "I come here when I need to think," Liam said as they walked to the edge of the cliffs. "It's my favorite spot." Avery smiled softly. It was easy to see why. The view was breathtaking, and the sound of the waves crashing on the rocks below had a calming effect. They sat side by side on the grass, watching the horizon. For the first time in a long while, Avery felt at peace. There was no rush, no expectations, just the present. "It's beautiful," she said after a long silence. "Yeah," Liam replied, but it was clear he wasn't just talking about the scenery. Avery noticed the way he was looking at her, and for a moment, her heart sped up. But unlike other times, when the fear of getting close overwhelmed her, now there was something different. A feeling of safety, as if, for the first time, she was ready to face what she felt. They spent hours there talking about everything and nothing. Liam, always a man of few words, began to open up, sharing his past, the reasons that brought him to Blue. He explained how he, too, had been running from something, from a life that seemed perfect but crumbled when he least expected it. His voice was calm, but filled with a sadness Avery recognized. It was the same kind of pain she had been hiding, the same feeling that the past still held control over her life. Avery, in turn, talked about New York, about the pressure, the scandal, the sense of failure that had consumed her since. For the first time, She allowed herself to tell the story in more detail, and as she spoke, she realized the words flowed more easily than she had imagined. Liam didn't interrupt, just listened, his eyes filled with understanding and empathy. With each story shared, each confession, Avery felt the wall between them crumble. It wasn't just physical attraction, though that was undeniable, but something deeper. There was a connection, a shared vulnerability that bonded them in a way she had never experienced before. As the afternoon approached, Liam took her to a more secluded beach where few people went. It was a quiet place with soft white sand and calm waves, and they walked side by side, their bare feet touching the cold water. The soft light of the late afternoon created an almost magical atmosphere. They didn't talk much during the walk, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. On the contrary, it was a silence filled with meaning, as if everything that needed to be said was already understood. The physical closeness between them felt natural, and the tension that usually hung in the air was absent. When they finally stopped to rest, sitting in the sand and watching the sunset, Avery felt more relaxed than she had expected. That moment, simple as it was, meant so much to her. Liam sat beside her, his hand resting close to hers but not touching. The warmth of his presence was comforting. Avery looked out at the sea, reflecting on how much had changed since she'd arrived in Blue Water. Part of her still feared what might happen if she fully gave in to what she felt. But in that moment, with Liam by her side, the fear seemed smaller. Her heart beat faster as she realized that for the first time, she wasn't thinking about the past or the consequences, just the present. Without saying a word, Liam leaned slightly toward her. The movement was subtle, but Avery sensed what was about to happen. Her heart raced, but this time, she didn't pull away. There was no more fear, no more doubt. When he got close enough, Avery allowed the kiss to happen, a soft touch at first, but it soon deepened. It wasn't like the first kiss full of frustration and confusion. This one was different, more genuine, more sincere. Avery felt the world around her fade away, as if in that moment, nothing else mattered but Liam's touch and the feeling of finally allowing herself to feel. When the kiss ended, they stayed silent, breathing together, their hearts racing. She didn't pull away this time, nor did she apologize. She just stayed there, beside him, feeling the warmth of Liam's body and the peace that came with that closeness. Liam looked at her, a soft smile on his lips, and said quietly, "Thank you for trusting me." Avery smiled back, and for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to face whatever the future held. But for now, she was happy to simply enjoy the moment with Liam by her side. The morning in Blue Water was cloudy, the gray sky reflecting the heavy atmosphere settling over Liam. He sat on the edge of the dock, watching the gentle movement of the waves, but his mind was far from the peaceful scene before him. His thoughts were trapped in the past, wrapped around the secret he had fought to keep buried. Ever since Avery had entered his life, the shadow of everything he was hiding seemed to grow larger, and the weight of his guilt was becoming unbearable. The previous day had been perfect, almost surreal. The kiss they shared on the beach, the way Avery finally allowed herself to relax around him, was something Liam hadn't expected. He had seen her vulnerability, her desire to move forward, and it made him want to fight even harder for their relationship. But the closer they became, the deeper his fear grew that at any moment, it could all unravel. He knew that if she discovered the truth about his past, about what happened that fateful night years ago, everything between them could end. He didn't know how much longer he could keep the truth hidden. The feeling that the past was about to resurface was suffocating, and each day it became clearer that Avery was more involved than she could imagine. And now, with her recent discovery of the photograph, the threads of the past were beginning to weave together in dangerous ways. Meanwhile, in her grandmother's house, Avery felt an increasing restlessness. What should have been a moment of calm and happiness after her day with Liam had instead turned into a spiral of unanswered questions. That morning, she was organizing some old boxes, things her grandmother had left behind that Avery had yet to fully explore. When she lifted the lid of a dusty box, a series of letters and old photographs spilled onto the floor. Curious, she knelt down and began sifting through the contents, letting the old memories flow as each object revealed a piece of the past. That's when she found a photograph that made her heart stop for a moment. It was a black and white photo, apparently taken decades ago. Her grandmother was smiling beside a man Avery didn't recognize, but in the background, a building caught her as something she knew was part of Blue Water. Avery frowned, holding the photo more tightly. The image stirred a strange sense of déjà vu, as if something about it was out of place. Determined to understand more, she searched through the letters, but everything seemed like a disjointed puzzle. The more she looked, the more questions surfaced. Who was this man? And why did her grandmother seem so connected to Blue Water? Far more than Avery had ever realized. The photo unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. Something inside told her there was more to Blue Water than just summer memories. Her grandmother's involvement in the town seemed deeper, and the connection to Liam's past, though still unclear, was beginning to feel like more than just coincidence. Throughout the day, Avery couldn't get the photo out of her head. The image seemed to call her to unravel a part of the story that had been left untold for many years. She knew she needed to confront Liam, but at the same time, a growing fear gnawed at her fear that it might change everything between them. As the sun began to set, she decided she couldn't wait any longer. She grabbed the photo, slipped it in her bag, and made her way to Liam's house. The walk there felt longer than usual, each step weighed down by the tension she couldn't explain. When she arrived, she hesitated for a moment in front of the door, her heart racing, but then she took a deep breath and knocked. Liam opened the door, and when he saw Avery, his face lit up for a brief moment. But then he noticed something was off. Her expression was serious, almost somber, and his smile slowly faded. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside, making it clear this wasn't a light-hearted visit. "Avery, what's going on?" he asked, closing the door behind her, watching her with a mix of concern and curiosity. She hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I was going through some of my grandmother's things, and I found something." With that, she pulled the photograph from her bag and handed it to him. Liam took the photo, his gaze initially curious, but his expression quickly darkened. He stared at it for several seconds, and Avery could see the tension building in his body. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. "Who is this man?" Avery asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "And why does my grandmother seem so connected to Blue Water? I didn't know she had so much involvement with this town." Liam took his time to answer, his eyes still locked on the photograph. The tension in the air grew heavier, and Avery could feel that he was trying to find a way out of this conversation. But something inside him seemed to be breaking, as if this moment was the inevitable confrontation with everything he'd been trying to hide. I don't know who that man is," he lied, his voice tight. "But your grandmother did spend a lot of time here. That much I know." Avery watched him closely, and in that moment, she knew he wasn't being honest with her. The way he avoided her gaze, the hesitation in his voice, it all pointed to him hiding something. And that hurt her. After the day they spent together, after all the confessions they had shared, she had expected more honesty from him. But now it felt like Liam was building walls again. "You're lying to me, Liam," she said, her voice firm but laced with sadness. "I know there's more to this." Liam took a deep breath, finally meeting her gaze. But there was a deep pain in his eyes that Avery couldn't fully understand. "Avery, there are things that I don't know if you're ready to hear." She crossed her arms, trying to shield herself from the vulnerability she was starting to feel. "I deserve the truth. Whatever it is, I need to know." He stepped away for a moment, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Everything about him showed that he was fighting the urge to reveal what he had been hiding for so long, but Avery's expression forced him to confront that reality. When he finally turned back to her, his face was dark, troubled. "A long time ago, before you ever thought of coming to Blue Water, something happened here," he began, his voice low, as if each word was a burden. "Something involving your family and mine." Avery felt her blood run cold. She had suspected something was behind Liam's evasive behavior, but she hadn't been prepared to hear that it involved her own family. "What happened?" she whispered, her voice trembling with urgency. Liam hesitated again, as if choosing his words carefully. There was an accident, a tragedy. And in a way, the decisions your grandfather made years ago affected the lives of many people in Blue Water, including my family. The shock of his words hit Avery like a punch. She had never known much about her family's past in Blue Water, only the pleasant memories her grandmother had shared about happy summers. But now, it seemed there was a darker side to the story, one she had never been told. "What does this have to do with you?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion and fear. Liam took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers with a painful intensity. "Because, Avery, I was involved, in a way that, if you know, you might not be able to forgive me." Those words struck her like a blow. All the air seemed to leave her lungs as she tried to process what he was saying. There was so much left unsaid, so many layers of secrets she didn't even know how to begin unraveling. "Tell me what happened, Liam," she insisted, her desperation for the truth growing. "I need to know." Liam's gaze was heavy with guilt, but he knew he couldn't run anymore. "Your grandfather, he was responsible for many of the decisions that led to that accident. And I was there. And as much as I want to make it right, I know I can't change the past." Night fell softly over Blue Water, painting the sky in shades of purple and blue. The ocean breeze blew gently through the streets, carrying the salty scent and the promise of a mild evening. Inside Avery's house, the room was dimly lit by the warm glow of candles that Liam had lit. He moved easily through the kitchen, preparing dinner with a skill that Avery still found surprising. She watched him from the table, feeling a mix of admiration and apprehension. Since Liam had mentioned his family's involvement in the accident, a palpable tension had lingered between them. Avery tried not to dwell on what was to come, on what would be revealed, but she knew that she couldn't avoid it much longer. The closeness they had shared, once so comforting, now carried an uncertainty she didn't know how to handle. Liam turned, carrying 2 plates to the table, and gave her a small smile as he placed the food in front of her. "I hope you like it," he said, trying to keep his tone light, but Avery could sense that he was just as anxious as she was. The invisible tension hung in the air, almost tangible. "I'm sure it's great," she replied, forcing a smile. She tried to act naturally, but inside, her mind raced with endless questions. They began eating in silence, the sound of cutlery the only noise filling the space between the unspoken words. Avery knew she couldn't delay any longer. The previous day had brought a revelation too big to simply be forgotten. She needed to understand what had really happened, and she needed to know how Liam fit into it all. So, she began, setting her fork down gently on her plate and meeting his gaze directly. "I think it's time you told me what really happened." Liam paused, his eyes fixed on his plate for a few seconds before lifting them to meet hers. The weight of her words settled between them like a stone dropped in a calm lake, creating ripples of tension. He had known this moment would come, but he wasn't prepared for the consequences that might follow. "Avery," he started, his voice low and hesitant. "I've already told you that there are things in my past that are hard to talk about. It's not that I want to hide them from you, but because I'm afraid that once you know, everything between us could change." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his, feeling a mixture of pain and determination. "I need to know, Liam. I need to understand why it feels like our story is so intertwined with something that happened years ago. I know you well enough to see that you're trying to protect me from something, but keeping it from me is hurting me more." Liam sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. He looked at the candles on the table for a few moments, as if trying to gather the courage to continue. "It all started years ago, when I was still young. There was a major project underway here in Blue Water, something that promised to change the town and bring prosperity. My dad was involved in it, just like your grandfather." Avery's eyes widened. The mention of her grandfather in that context took her by surprise, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. The project seemed perfect. Construction, jobs, money flowing into the town, but something was wrong from the start. They underestimated the risks, ignored the warnings. And then it happened, a major accident, something that changed everything. Liam's voice grew heavier as he spoke, and she saw the pain he was trying to suppress emerge on his face. "What happened, Liam?" Avery asked, feeling her chest tighten. Liam looked away, shame evident in his expression. My dad worked directly with your grandfather, and during the construction of one of the most important buildings, there was a collapse. Many people were hurt. One person died. Someone important to me, to my family. My mother. The revelation hit Avery like a punch, and she felt the impact immediately. Her breath caught in her throat. Her thoughts scrambled. Your mother? The question escaped her in a whisper. Liam nodded, his eyes distant. She was working as a volunteer on the project, helping with logistics. When the building collapsed, she was there. They tried to save her, but they couldn't. It was fast, but that didn't lessen the pain. My father never forgave himself. And honestly, neither did I. The air in the room seemed heavier, and Avery struggled to process the information. She had known Liam's story was painful, but she hadn't been prepared for the depth of that tragedy. The pieces of the puzzle started to come together in her mind: his behavior, his emotional barriers, the constant fear that something between them would be destroyed. It all made sense now. What does my grandfather have to do with this? Avery asked, her voice trembling. Liam took a deep breath, clearly reluctant to continue. Your grandfather was responsible for the project. He made risky decisions, ignored safety warnings. People knew something like this could happen, but he was focused on the profits, on the idea of transforming Blue Water. He wasn't a bad man, but he was blinded by ambition. And in the end, the tragedy happened. Avery felt a knot form in her throat. It was hard to imagine her grandfather, the kind and loving man she had known, being involved in something so terrible. Her memories of him were filled with affection and laughter. He was the man who had taught her how to swim, who always brought special gifts when she visited her grandmother's house. The idea that he could have been responsible, even indirectly, for such a tragedy shook her deeply. But that wasn't all. Liam continued, his voice now barely above a whisper. After the accident, there was an investigation. The town was in shock, and the pressure to find someone to blame was immense. Your grandfather did everything he could to save the family's reputation, and in the process, my father, he was scapegoated. The blame fell on him, even though he was just following orders. It was a brutal legal battle, but in the end, he lost everything. We lost everything. Avery didn't know what to say. The story was devastating for both Liam and for her. And as she tried to process it all, a wave of mixed emotions overwhelmed her. Guilt, grief for something she hadn't known was part of her history, and fear of what this might mean for their future. Liam, I didn't know, she said, her eyes welling with tears. I had no idea my family was involved in this, and now I don't know how to handle it. My grandfather, I loved him, and you, Liam reached out, taking her hands in his. Avery, I'm not telling you this to push you away. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. But I also want you to know that despite everything, I love you. That hasn't changed. And I just hope that somehow we can get through this together. The word love hung in the air, unexpected and intense. Avery felt the weight of the moment, but at the same time, a sense of relief began to seep in. Liam was there, vulnerable, willing to face the past with her, no matter how painful it was. And despite all the confusion she felt, the only thing she knew for certain in that moment was that she loved him too. With tears in her eyes, Avery squeezed Liam's hands, feeling their connection deepen despite the adversity. The past, as painful as it was, didn't have to define them. They still had the present, and maybe, just maybe, they had a future together. Liam, I love you too, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion but filled with conviction. And we'll get through this, together. Avery woke up that morning with an emptiness that seemed to spread throughout her entire body. The events of the previous night were fresh in her mind, but the memory brought no comfort. Instead, it felt like the world she trusted had crumbled in a single blow. She rose from the bed slowly, feeling the weight of her emotions, and walked to the window, where the pale morning light filtered in, cold and indifferent. Blue Water appeared to be the same quiet town it had always been. The sound of waves crashing in the distance, seagulls flying through the sky, and the breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. But for Avery, everything had changed. The revelation from Liam about the accident and her family's involvement in the tragedy had created a void inside her, a dark space she didn't know how to fill. She felt betrayed in a way she couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just the pain of learning that her own family had been part of something so terrible, but also the fact that Liam, the man she had begun to trust, had kept it hidden for so long. Even though he had confessed and shown his pain, something inside her still couldn't handle the truth. It was as if there was more, something he hadn't yet revealed. Avery knew she couldn't avoid it forever, but at that moment, all she wanted was distance. She needed space to think, to understand how her life had changed so drastically in such a short time. At the same time, the idea of distancing herself from Liam was tearing her apart, as if the emotional break was slowly eating her away. She spent the rest of the morning wandering around the house, trying to distract herself with mundane tasks, but nothing could lift the weight pressing on her chest. The old photograph she had found still lay on the table, a constant reminder of how the past seemed determined to intertwine with her present. Her grandfather, the tragedy, and now Liam, it all formed a tangled mess she didn't know how to unravel. By noon, the doorbell rang, and Avery's heart raced. She knew, without needing to check, that it was Liam. A part of her wanted to ignore the sound, pretend she wasn't home. But another part, the part that still loved him deeply, pushed her to open the door. There he was, standing on the doorstep with a serious expression, his face marked by anguish. Avery's chest tightened at the sight of him. There was a sadness in his eyes that made her want to throw herself into his arms, but she knew she couldn't. "Not now. I needed to see you," Liam began, his voice low and restrained. "I needed to know if you're okay." Avery looked at him, the silence between them growing with each passing second. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to put into words the confusion she felt. Part of her wanted to embrace him, to say everything would be fine. But the other part, the part that was most hurt, couldn't simply ignore the pain. I don't know if I'm okay," she finally replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what to do with all of this, Liam." He took a step forward, hesitating as if unsure whether he should come any closer. "Avery, I know it's a lot to take in, and I know I made a mistake by not telling you sooner. But everything I told you is true. I wanted to protect you, to give you time to get to know me and the town before putting this weight on you." She shook her head, feeling tears begin to well up in her eyes. "But you lied, Liam. You let me believe we were building something together, and all along, there was this secret between us." Liam felt the impact of her words like a blow. He knew she was right, but it didn't make the pain any less real. "I never wanted to hurt you, Avery. The last thing I wanted was to push you away." Avery turned her gaze away, "And how am I supposed to trust you now? How am I supposed to believe that everything we've shared so far was real, when there was always something hidden?" Liam took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I love you, Avery. That, at least, has always been real. Everything I feel for you is true." She finally looked at him, and Liam saw the tears she was struggling to hold back. "I don't know if that's enough." The pain in her words was almost unbearable for Liam. He took another step forward, now close enough to touch her, but hesitated. He knew that if she pulled away, it would be the end. "Please, let me explain everything," he pleaded, his voice softer now, heavy with emotion. "I'll tell you everything that happened, every detail. But please, don't push me away." Avery closed her eyes for a moment, trying to control the flood of emotions. She wanted to know the truth. She wanted to understand what had happened in that tragedy, but she was also afraid to hear it, because deep down, she knew it could change everything. If there was something even darker, something Liam still hadn't revealed, it could be the final end between them. "I need time," she said, opening her eyes and facing him with determination. "I can't deal with all of this right now. I don't know if I'm ready to hear more." Liam felt the hope falter inside him. He knew that pushing her now could drive her further away, but at the same time, he didn't want to lose her. "I understand," he said finally, his voice filled with sorrow. "I'll give you the time you need, but I'll be here waiting. I won't give up on us, Avery. No matter how hard this is, I won't lose you." She nodded, her breath uneven, and took a step back, signaling that the conversation was over. Liam understood the gesture, even though every part of him wanted to stay. With one last look full of sadness and unspoken desire, he turned and walked away, leaving Avery alone once again. When the door closed, Avery collapsed. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled, and she sank into the sofa, feeling the weight of her solitude envelop her. She wanted so badly to believe in Liam, to believe in the love they had, but fear and distrust were stronger. She didn't know how to cope with the fact that the person she was falling in love with had kept such a huge secret. For the rest of the day, Avery wandered through the house like a shadow of herself, trying to find clarity in the chaos of her emotions. But all she could feel was a deep pain, a wound that seemed unwilling to heal. She wondered if she would ever be able to forgive Liam, if she would ever be able to trust him enough to move forward. And more than that, if she could forgive herself for wanting so badly to be with him, even knowing everything he had kept hidden. That night, as the wind blew outside, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence of the house her only companion. Liam's face wouldn't leave her thoughts. She knew he was hurting just as much as she was, and that tore her apart even more. But deep down, Avery knew she needed time. Time to process, to decide what to do with the broken heart she now carried. And as much as she wished love could be enough, in that moment, fear still had the upper hand. The silence in Avery's house was suffocating. The days following her conversation with Liam were lonely, and while she knew she needed this time for herself, something inside her seemed to be breaking slowly. She couldn't shake the sense of emptiness, a constant absence that grew whenever she thought of him. With each passing hour, the distance between them became harder to bear, but at the same time, the fear of what else might be hidden kept her trapped. She busied herself with trivial tasks, tidying the house, walking through town, but the thought of Liam was always present, like a silent ghost following her. When she was alone, the desire to be with him mingled with the pain of knowing there were still secrets he hadn't shared. Doubt had rooted itself deeper every day. On a cloudy morning, while walking along the beach trying to clear her mind, Avery noticed an unfamiliar car parked near the market. It was an old model, different from the usual vehicles in Blue Water. Her curiosity was piqued, but she quickly became distracted by the sound of the waves. She continued her walk until a figure a few meters away caught her attention. A man, with his back turned, was talking to someone from the market, but something about the way he moved, the way he scanned the surroundings, made her stop for a moment. He seemed out of place, as if he was there for reasons different from those of the other townspeople. There was something in the way the man looked around that left her uneasy. He seemed investigative, like he was searching for something or someone. A chill ran down Avery's spine, and she quickened her pace, deciding it was best to return home. The feeling that there were more secrets, more things buried in Liam's past, deeply unsettled her. She wanted to trust him, to believe that despite everything, there could be a chance for them, but the fear of more dark revelations lingered. When she got home, she found a text message from Nora asking her to stop by the inn later for a chat. Avery felt a brief sense of relief at the prospect of having someone to confide in. Nora had always been a grounding presence, someone she could trust and who made her feel welcome. That afternoon, she walked to the inn. Upon entering, she found Nora at the reception, greeting her with a warm smile, though Avery immediately noticed a tension in the air. Nora beckoned her to a more private room, and Avery sensed that something serious was about to be discussed. "There's something you need to know, dear," Nora began, as she poured a cup of tea for Avery. "A man arrived in town yesterday. He didn't say much, but he asked some questions that made me uneasy. He's looking for someone, and I think Liam might be involved." Avery's heart raced. She straightened in her chair, feeling a wave of apprehension wash over her. What did he want to know? He mentioned Liam's name, but wasn't clear about his intentions. He asked about people's pasts, spoke vaguely about debts and old problems. I didn't tell him much, but something about him felt wrong. I think you need to talk to Liam. Avery's mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. Who was this man? And why would Liam be connected to someone like that? The unease she had felt earlier when seeing the stranger in the market returned with full force. And now, it seemed all the pieces were about to fall into place, revealing something she feared discovering. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Avery realized she could no longer delay confronting Liam. She needed answers, even though the thought of hearing more truth terrified her. The fear of being hurt again was real, but the need for clarity was stronger. She arrived at Liam's house, her heart pounding. When he opened the door, his expression shifted quickly from surprise to concern. Avery stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, feeling a sense of urgency take over. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm but laden with tension. "There's a man in town, and he's asking about you. Nora told me." Liam closed the door, his expression growing more tense than usual. He knew exactly who she was talking about. The past he had tried so hard to keep buried was finally catching up, and now it seemed inevitable that everything would unravel. "I knew this would happen," he said in a dark tone, "but I didn't think it would be this soon." Avery stared at him, waiting for an explanation, knowing that whatever he was about to say could change everything between them. "Who is he, Liam? And what else are you hiding?" Liam took a deep breath, visibly battling the urge to flee from the truth. He knew he could no longer avoid it. He had to tell Avery the rest of the story, even if it meant losing her for good. "That man, he's someone I used to work with a long time ago. Before Blue Water, before all of this," Liam began, his voice low. "I was in trouble trying to rebuild my life after losing everything when my mom died. I got involved in some bad deals, made choices I shouldn't have. That man was part of those choices." Avery remained silent, taking in his words. The air felt heavier as the truth began to unfold. "What kind of deals?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. Liam looked at her, his eyes filled with guilt and regret. "Illegal deals. Things I'm ashamed to have been part of. But I was desperate. I needed money, I needed a way out, and that's how I ended up involved with him." The revelation hit Avery like a rock. She had imagined many things, but not this. The man she was falling in love with had been involved in criminal activities, something that could completely shatter her perception of him. But at the same time, she knew Liam wasn't that man anymore. She could see the remorse in his eyes, the pain of a past he never wanted to relive. "And now he's after you?" Avery asked, her voice trembling. Liam nodded slowly. "He wants me to pay off an old debt, not necessarily with money, but with favors. And I won't get involved in that life again. I left it behind for a reason, but he won't give up easily." A mix of anger and fear swelled inside Avery. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Liam took a step forward, trying to reach her, but stopped when he saw the pain in her face. "I wanted to protect you, Avery. I wanted you to see who I am now, not who I was before. I thought if I told you everything, you'd leave. And I can't lose you." His voice was filled with sincerity, but Avery was still reeling. The man she had begun to love had lied, not just about his mother's accident, but also about who he really was, about the kind of life he had led before coming to Blue Water. She ran her hands through her hair, trying to organize her thoughts. I don't know what to do with this, Liam. I don't know if I can handle more secrets." Liam moved closer, desperation in his expression. "I understand, Avery, and if you need time, I'll give it to you. But please, know that I'm trying to be better. Everything I've done since coming to Blue Water was to rebuild my life. I love you, and I never wanted my past to affect us like this." Avery looked at him, her heart torn between love and pain. There was so much that still needed to be said, so many wounds that needed healing. But in that moment, she wasn't sure if she could overcome the fear and distrust she now felt. "I need to think," she said, her voice fragile. "I need time." Liam nodded, understanding that this might be his last chance to regain her trust. "I'll be here, Avery, when you're ready." She turned and left, her heart heavy, knowing she was leaving behind not only Liam, but a part of herself. Their future was uncertain, and as much as the love between them was strong, the weight of the secrets might be too much to bear. Rain poured heavily over Blue Water, creating a steady rhythm against Avery's windows. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and the dark clouds that filled the sky seemed to reflect the emotional storm raging inside her. Avery sat on her living room sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring out the window. The sound of the storm filled the house, But it wasn't enough to silence the incessant thoughts about Liam, his past, and all the revelations that had come to light. Over the past few days, Avery had tried to keep her distance, but the truth was that the space between them only made her suffer more. The weight of the lies and secrets still pressed heavily on her chest. But at the same time, the desire to be with him seemed greater than the hurt she carried. She wanted answers, but she also craved the comfort Liam brought, and this internal conflict was tearing her apart. When she heard a loud knock on the door, she startled. She knew, even before she stood up, that it was him. Something about the sound and the intensity with which the knocks echoed through the house made her certain that Liam was there. Hesitant, Avery walked to the door, her heart beating faster with each step. When she opened it, she found Liam standing in the rain, soaked but seemingly unfazed by the weather. His face was tense, his eyes locked on hers as if everything he needed was right in front of him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent, barely audible over the sound of the rain around them. Avery stood there for a moment, his words hanging heavily in the air between them. There was anger and hurt inside her, but there was also love, something she couldn't push away. She stepped aside, letting him in without saying a word. Liam stepped inside, his clothes dripping onto the wooden floor. The silence between them felt suffocating, but the tension was stronger. When he finally turned to face her, his eyes were dark but determined. "I can't take this anymore," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "I can't stand seeing you suffer because of something I caused. Avery, I need to tell you everything, even if it means losing you forever." She remained silent, her eyes fixed on him. Part of her wanted to tell him to stop, to say no more because she knew the truth might be unbearable. But the other part, the part that needed to understand, the part trapped in confusion, pushed her to listen. She gave a slight nod, indicating for him to continue. Liam took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "The accident that killed my mother, it wasn't just a miscalculation. It wasn't just a tragic accident. Your grandfather knew the risks, Avery. He knew there were problems with the construction, but he was under pressure to meet the deadline. And he made cuts in safety costs. I heard my dad talk about it so many times. And in the end, it was my mother who paid the price." Avery felt the air leave her lungs. She knew her grandfather had been involved in the accident, but hearing that he had made decisions that directly led to the tragedy was devastating. Tears began to well up in her eyes, but she stood firm, waiting for Liam to continue. "I was young, but I remember everything. After the accident, your grandfather did everything he could to protect the family name. He placed the blame on my dad, pushed all the responsibility onto him. We lost everything. My family was destroyed, and I spent years hating him, and by extension, everything that came from your family." Liam ran a hand through his wet hair, his voice starting to break. "But then you came, and suddenly, all that anger I had started to fade. You weren't responsible for any of it, and I found myself loving you, even when I tried to fight it. But the past was always there, ready to come back and destroy whatever we were building." The tears Avery had been holding back finally fell. She felt shattered, torn between the man she loved and the brutal truth about her family's past. She took a step back, trying to process what she had just heard, but feeling I didn't know, she murmured, her voice cracking. "I didn't know my grandfather was responsible for all of this. I never imagined he could hurt so many people." Liam took a step forward, his expression softer now, but still filled with pain. "I know it's not your fault, and I don't want this to tear us apart. But I can't keep living with this between us, with this secret eating away at us." Avery looked at him, her breath uneven, and for a moment, the silence between them felt crushing. But then, something inside her began to open. The weight of the guilt she carried for her family's past mixed with the pain of knowing Liam had suffered so much. And suddenly, the words started to come, words she didn't even realize she needed to say. "I understand what you felt," Avery said, her voice broken but filled with a truth she could no longer hold back. "I ran from something too. In New York, there was a scandal. I was working on a big architecture project, something that was supposed to be the peak of my career. But My boss, someone I trusted, manipulated everything. He used my name to cover up his own mistakes. When everything came to light, I was the one blamed. I lost my job, I lost my reputation, and I felt so betrayed, so hurt, that I ran here. I thought Blue Water would be a place to start over, but now I feel like the past always finds a way to follow us. Liam looked at her with a mix of surprise and understanding. He hadn't known that Avery carried such a deep pain, a story that mirrored his own in a way. He took another step toward her, now close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, even though he was still drenched from the rain. "I don't want us to keep running," he said softly, his eyes filled with tenderness and vulnerability. "We can face this together, Avery. I know we can." She looked at him, tears still falling, but there was something different now. For the first time, she felt understood. She knew that despite everything they had been through, there was love there, something strong enough to face the past. Avery took another step forward, closing the gap between them, and without hesitation, she pulled him close. The kiss was soft at first, but filled with everything they had held back. The pain, the fear, the guilt had all melted away in that moment as their lips met. It was as if, finally, they were ready to give themselves fully to each other, without secrets, without hesitation. When the kiss ended, they remained silent, their eyes locked, breathing together. Liam pulled her closer, wrapping her in an embrace that was both comforting and full of desire. Avery let herself be held, feeling her body relax for the first time in days. They spent the night together, their bodies and hearts finally aligned, unafraid of the past. The storm raged outside, but inside the house, there was a calm they hadn't felt in a long time. The secrets, now fully revealed, had made room for something greater, for the love that now bound them, with no more shadows between them. Morning arrived gently in Blue Water, with the shy sun peeking through the heavy clouds left by the previous night's rain. The fresh, clean air flowed through the open bedroom window, bringing with it the salty scent of the ocean and the distant sound of waves crashing on the beach. Avery lay in bed, her eyes open but unmoving, feeling the warmth of Liam's body beside her. He was still asleep, his breathing steady and calm, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. The world, which had once felt so heavy and confusing, now seemed to have finally fallen into place. Avery allowed herself to relax, feeling a calmness in her chest that she hadn't experienced in a long time. The night before had been intense, full of revelations, but also reconciliation. For the first time in months, she felt whole, connected. She turned slowly in bed, watching Liam's peaceful face as he slept. There was deep relief in seeing him so close, knowing that the secrets that once separated them were no longer a barrier. Now, everything was in the open, and despite the pain those truths had brought, Avery knew that what they had now was real. There were no more fears, no more shadows of the past. There was only the two of them, ready to discover what the future held. Not wanting to wake him, Avery quietly slipped out of bed, picking up one of Liam's oversized shirts from the floor and heading to the kitchen. Making breakfast was a simple act, but it made her feel connected to this new beginning. She knew that, despite everything they had faced, there was still much to build between them. But in that moment, the future seemed promising. As the coffee brewed and the eggs sizzled in the pan, she found herself reflecting on the past few days. The distance she had imposed on Liam, the secrets that had come to light, and the constant fear of being hurt again. Yet everything now seemed to be falling into place. Avery knew their journey wouldn't be easy, but the hardest part was behind them. They had both confronted their pasts, and together they could move forward. Liam appeared in the kitchen not long after, dressed in just a pair of sweatpants and rubbing the sleep from his eyes. When he saw her, wearing his shirt and cooking at the stove, a soft smile spread across his face, as if seeing her there was all he needed to start the day right. "Good morning," he murmured, walking over and wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. The warmth of his body was comforting, and Avery melted into his embrace for a moment, savoring the simple affection. "Good morning," she replied, smiling, I thought you'd sleep a little longer. Liam chuckled softly, kissing her neck gently. It's hard to sleep when you're not beside me. Avery's heart skipped a beat at his words, but at the same time, there was a sense of calm in knowing Liam was as committed to this new beginning as she was. They sat down together at the table, eating in comfortable silence for a few moments, a silence filled with everything they had said and shared the night before. Are you okay? Liam asked, breaking the silence. The concern in his eyes was clear. He knew that despite their reconciliation, Avery still carried her own fears and insecurities. She nodded, but then set her fork down and looked at him with sincerity. I'm okay, but sometimes I still feel like I'm trying to find my place in all of this. I'm still adjusting. It's been a lot, and even though I'm happy, sometimes I'm scared. Liam placed his hand over hers, squeezing it gently. I know it won't be easy. I know things between us are still settling, but I'm here, Avery, and I want to help you through it, through everything you're feeling. She looked at him for a moment, feeling a wave of gratitude. Knowing he was there, willing to give her the space and time she needed, made her feel safer. But there was a part of her, a part still clinging to fear, that needed to be spoken aloud. I'm afraid of losing myself again, she admitted, her voice low, almost a whisper. After everything that happened in New York, after losing it all, I don't know if I'm ready to fully give myself, to be vulnerable again. Liam met her gaze, his eyes intense and understanding. You won't lose yourself, Avery. And if you ever feel like you are, I'll be here to remind you who you are. I don't want you to change for me or feel pressured to be something you're not. I want you to be yourself, with all your flaws, fears, and uncertainty. His words hit Avery in a way she hadn't expected. There was a depth to them that made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: security. She had always thought that love carried with it the risk of losing oneself, of losing control. But with Liam, she felt the opposite. He made her feel that, instead of losing herself, she could finally find herself. I love you, she said suddenly, the words spilling from her mouth unexpectedly but genuinely. It was the first time she had said it aloud, the first time she had admitted to herself and to him that she was fully in. Liam smiled, a calm smile, as if he had already known. He leaned in, kissing her softly, and when he pulled back, he responded with the same certainty. I love you too, Avery, and we're in this together. The rest of the day passed peacefully, almost as if they were starting a new life right then and there. They took a walk along the beach, hand in hand, talking about trivial things but also sharing more about themselves. Avery spoke more about New York, about how she still had nightmares from the days when her life seemed to be falling apart. Liam, in turn, spoke about his life before Blue Water, the struggles he faced in rebuilding his identity, and how, for a long time, he believed he would never find peace. As they walked, feeling the cold sand beneath their feet, Avery realized how much being with Liam made her feel safe. Even with all the difficulties they would still face, the fear she had carried was starting to fade. Every step beside him made her feel more grounded, more willing to face her own demons. The love between them was the anchor she needed to allow herself to move forward. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Avery realized that despite all the fear and pain she had experienced, there was something beautiful in starting over. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for it. When they returned to the house, night had already fallen, and the air had grown colder. Liam lit the fireplace while Avery curled up on the sofa, watching the flames dance. He sat beside her, pulling her into his arms, and there, in the warmth of the fire and Liam's embrace, she felt a peace she didn't know was possible. They stayed like that in silence, just enjoying each other's company. And as the hours passed, Avery realized that for the first time since arriving in Blue Water, she felt she had finally found her place. And that place was beside Liam. The tranquility that Avery and Liam had built together started to unravel, like waves slowly but inevitably crashing against the shore. In the days following their reconciliation, they allowed themselves to enjoy genuine moments of happiness. Walks around town, quiet dinners on her porch, and laughter that felt light and sincere. It was as if they had finally found a balance, where love flourished without the past weighing so heavily. However, Avery knew that their peace was fragile, and that Blue Water's past still held secrets. It was on an otherwise ordinary morning, while organizing things in her grandmother's house, that Avery stumbled upon an old envelope. It had been hidden at the back of a drawer, underneath documents she had already gone through before, but somehow she had missed this small, yellowed volume. When she opened it, her heart stopped for a second. Inside were letters and documents that mentioned not just her grandfather's name, but her father's as well. Her father. Until that moment, Avery had believed his involvement in Blue Water's affairs was minimal. He had always been distant regarding the family business, or at least that was what she had thought. But these letters told a different story. His connection to the project that resulted in the accident not only existed, but it seemed to run deeper than she could have ever imagined. Avery felt a wave of conflicting emotions as she read the first lines. Her father's name appeared in correspondence related to high-risk investments in Blue Water, alongside discussions of financial decisions and dubious business practices. As she read on, a disturbing truth began to surface. Her father had not only known about the safety cuts in the project Liam had mentioned, but had actively contributed to the decisions that led to those shortcuts. Sitting on the floor surrounded by the papers, Avery felt as if the ground was collapsing beneath her. It had already been hard enough to accept that her grandfather bore responsibility for the accident, but learning that her father had been involved, and in such a direct way, was devastating. She felt her breath catch, her chest tightening with the pain of a betrayal she had never expected. The sound of a car pulling up outside made her stand up quickly. She recognized the sound of Liam's truck, and for a moment, she hesitated to tell him what she had discovered. After all, he had already faced the pain of knowing that his mother had died in an accident tied to Avery's family. Now, learning that it wasn't just her grandfather, but her father too, could destroy everything they had rebuilt. The fear of losing him was overwhelming, but Avery knew she couldn't hide it. Not after everything they had promised each other. Liam walked into the house with a calm smile, his face lit by the late morning sunlight. He walked over to her, leaning down to kiss her forehead, before noticing the serious expression on her face. "Avery, what's wrong?" She couldn't hold back the flood of emotions surging through her. With trembling hands, she handed him the envelope. Liam took the papers, not understanding at first what was going on, but as he began to read, his expression changed. The calmness disappeared, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and pain. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. "Your father," Liam began, but his voice faltered for a moment. He took a deep breath, trying to process the new revelation. He knew he was involved in all of this from the beginning. Avery could only nod, unable to find the words. She knew this was tearing him apart inside, just as it was tearing her apart. Seeing Liam standing there, holding the proof that her family was responsible for so much pain, was devastating. "I didn't know," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never knew he was involved. I thought he was always distant, always reserved. I had no idea." Liam continued staring at the documents, his hands tense, as if he didn't know whether to drop them or hold on tighter. Finally, he placed them down on the table and ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. This is a lot. I don't know what to do with this right now." The pain in his voice was like a knife to Avery's heart. She knew that this discovery could be the end of everything. Liam had been trying to cope with the secrets and tragedies of the past, but this new layer of involvement made things even more complicated. How could they continue with this weight between them? "Liam, I love you," Avery said suddenly, desperate to find a way through this moment. "I know this is awful, but I'm me, not them. I know it's hard, but we can't let what they did in the past destroy what we have now." Liam looked at her, his eyes filled with pain and indecision. "I know, Avery, I know you're not responsible for any of this, but it's your family. And all of this is so connected to my mother, to my life." Avery felt the desperation rising inside her. Their family's pasts were intertwined in a way that made it nearly impossible to separate their love from the old wounds and resentment. But at the same time, she didn't want to give up, not after everything they had been through. I'm struggling with this too, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I feel betrayed too. My father lied just like my grandfather. They hid this from me my whole life, and I'm trying to process it all. But I don't want what they did to destroy us, Liam. We can't let the past define who we are now. The silence stretched, and Avery feared that Liam was pulling away again. But then, he stepped closer to her, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, comforting, and Avery felt a flicker of hope. I love you, Avery, he said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. I never thought I'd say that again after everything I found out about your family. But what I feel for you, it's real. I need time to process all of this. She nodded, understanding that the pain they were facing wouldn't disappear easily. I need time too, she said, taking a deep breath. But please, let's face this together. Liam pulled her closer, wrapping her in his arms. And in that moment, Avery knew that despite the new obstacles, they still had a chance. The love they shared was strong enough to withstand even the most painful truths. But both of them knew that the road ahead would be difficult. The days that followed were marked by an atmosphere of caution. Avery and Liam were still together, but conversations about the past had become inevitable. They began to dig deeper into the documents Avery had found, trying to understand how everything fit together and how her father's involvement had impacted not only the tragedy of the past, but also their present. Liam struggled with his emotions, trying to balance the love he felt for Avery with the anger and grief over his mother's death. He knew Avery wasn't responsible, but sometimes it was hard not to associate the pain with her family's name. Avery, for her part, was trying to find a way to cope with the new reality that her own family had caused so much suffering. She knew that their future together would depend on how they could navigate this together. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but with each passing day, she felt that they were moving forward, even if it was just one step at a time. The light rain falling over Bluewater the next morning seemed to reflect Avery's heavy mood. Sitting at the kitchen table, she stared out the window, where the drops gathered and slowly ran down the glass. Her heart was still weighed down by the revelations of the past few days, and the feeling of betrayal lingered in her chest, like a wound that refused to heal. The silence in the house was oppressive, interrupted only by the soft sound of the rain. Since her conversation with Liam, things between them had changed. The warmth of closeness was gone, as was the lightness of before. The love was still there, clear and strong, but now it was surrounded by a wall of uncertainties, fueled by the painful truths that had come to light. Liam had also changed. In the moments they met, there was a caution in their gestures and words, as if they were both walking on unstable ground, not knowing if the next step would lead to full reconciliation or an even deeper chasm. He was trying not to let resentment take over, but Avery could see the weight of the past in his eyes, the pain still alive and present. She couldn't blame him. She knew he was trying, just like her, to find a way to deal with everything. But at the same time, she felt that the truths they now knew were creating an invisible barrier between them. They shared the same pain, but it was a pain that separated them rather than united them. At that moment, a soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. At first, she thought it was Liam, but when she opened it, she saw Nora standing in the doorway, holding a dripping blue umbrella. Nora's warm smile brought immediate comfort, something Avery hadn't realized she needed until that moment. "May I come in?" Nora asked, in that kind, motherly way that made Avery feel so cared for. "Of course," Avery replied, opening the door wider and stepping aside to let her in. Nora shook off the umbrella, closing it as she moved toward the table. "How are you, dear?" Nora asked, sitting beside Avery. Her eyes, always full of kindness, were now more serious, as if she could sense the weight Avery was carrying. Avery sighed, resting her elbows on the table and cradling her head in her hands. "It's been hard," she admitted, "finding out that my father was involved in all of this, and seeing how much it's affecting Liam. I don't know how to keep going." Nora nodded slowly, as if she understood completely. "I know you and Liam are going through difficult times, but what you two have is strong. Avery, I can see that. Don't let a past you can't control destroy the present you're trying to build." Avery looked at her, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. But what if it's too much for him? What if I'm too much for him? I don't know if he can look at me without seeing what my family did. Nora leaned forward, taking Avery's hands in hers. Love isn't easy, dear. It never is. And you two have more challenges than most, but I don't think he loves you any less because of it. He's just trying to figure out how to move forward with all the pain he feels. Give him the time he needs, and don't forget to give yourself the same. Nora's words were comforting, but there was still an uncertainty gnawing at Avery. She knew she needed to be patient, but the fear of losing Liam to the weight of the past made her restless. After a few more moments of conversation, Nora said her goodbyes, leaving Avery alone again. The house seemed larger and quieter after she left. Avery looked at the kitchen, at the documents still piled on the table, reminding her of all that had been revealed. The connection between her father and the accident that destroyed Liam's family was too heavy a burden to ignore. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't live under that shadow forever. As the afternoon began to fade, the sky remained overcast and the rain persisted. Avery decided she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to face Liam, confront what was keeping them apart, and try to find a way to deal with it together. She picked up the phone and, without hesitation, called him. "Can you come over? I think we need to talk," she said, her voice firm but full of emotion. Liam didn't take long to arrive. When he walked in, the air between them was heavy with familiar tension, but there was something different this time. Avery could see in his eyes that he, too, was tired of living under the weight of that distance, of the silence that had settled between them. They sat at the table, the documents still present, like silent witnesses to everything they now knew. "Liam," Avery began, feeling her heart race. "I know things have been hard. I know what we found out about my father and my family was devastating, but I don't want that to destroy what we have." He looked at her, his face serious but not hostile. "I don't want to lose what we have, either, Avery. But it's hard not to associate all of this with the pain I've lived through. Every time I think about what happened, about what my mom went through, I can't help but think that, in some way, your family was part of it." Avery felt her chest tighten, but she knew he was just being honest. "I know. And I don't expect you to just forget or pretend it didn't happen. But I want us to face this together. I don't want what my family did to define who we are now." Liam ran a hand through his hair, an expression of exhaustion crossing his face. "I want that too, but it's not easy. There are days when I feel torn between what I feel for you and the anger I still carry about everything that happened." Avery swallowed hard, feeling the truth of his words like a knife. "I can't change what happened, Liam, and I can't change what my father did. But I'm here now, trying to be better, trying to be honest with you, and I need to know if that's enough." Liam was silent for a long moment, and Avery could feel the weight of his decision hanging in the air. Then, he leaned forward, taking her hands in his. "You're enough, Avery. More than enough. But I need time. I need time to accept all of this, to let the anger go, and I need you to help me through it." Avery felt a wave of relief wash over her. The path ahead would still be long and full of challenges, but at that moment, she knew they were willing to face it together. "I'm here," she said, squeezing his hands tightly, "and I'm not going anywhere." The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully, with the two of them sitting together, talking about the future and how they could, little by little, rebuild the trust and peace they both wanted so badly. There were no grand promises, but there was sincerity, and that was what they needed most at that moment. When night fell, the storm finally relented. The clouds slowly dissipated, revealing a starry sky, and the sound of rain ceased, leaving the town of Bluewater in an unusual calm. Sitting on the porch, under the now clear sky, Avery and Liam embraced, feeling each other's warmth as a reminder that, despite everything, they were still together. And, for the first time in days, Avery allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they truly had a chance to overcome it all. Avery woke up to the soft sunlight streaming through the curtains. Next to her, Liam was still asleep, his breathing calm and steady. The warmth of his body was comforting, and for a moment, she lay there, watching him, feeling the serenity that the moment brought. There was a tranquility in seeing Liam so close, so present, after everything they had been through. The nights of uncertainty and tension between them now seemed distant, and although the scars of the past were still there, they were no longer as deep. Liam began to stir, his eyes slowly opening. When he saw her, he smiled softly, a smile that Avery loved so much. She returned it, reaching out to touch his face, her fingers gently brushing over his unshaven beard. The touch was intimate, a silent reminder that despite everything, they were still together. "Good morning," she whispered, not wanting to break the peaceful moment. "Good morning," he replied, his voice husky with sleep. "Have you been awake for long?" Avery shook her head, still smiling. "Not long. I was just watching you." Liam chuckled softly, turning on his side and pulling her closer, wrapping her in his arms. "I like knowing you're here when I wake up." She nestled against him, feeling her heart relax with that simple gesture. "I like being here. I like knowing we're okay." The comfortable silence between them stretched out, and for the first time in days, Avery felt that the weight of the past was lifting. They were rebuilding themselves little by little, step by step, facing the difficulties openly and honestly. The trust that had once seemed fragile was now growing stronger. After a while, they finally got up and went to the kitchen, where Liam began to make breakfast. The scene was simple, but for Avery, it held deep meaning. Seeing Liam move around the kitchen, casual and at ease, as if they had been living together for years, made her realize how much had changed since she first arrived in Blue Water. The chaos that had once dominated her mind was starting to give way to calm. There were still shadows of the past, but now she felt she could face them with Liam by her side. As he worked with the ingredients, Avery remembered the external threats that still loomed over them. The man who had appeared in town, linked to Liam's past, hadn't shown signs of leaving, and that made her uneasy. She knew Liam was doing everything he could to distance himself from that part of his life, but the risk was still real. "Liam," she began, hesitating as she set the table. "What about that man? Is he still in town?" Liam paused for a moment, the smile on his face slowly fading. He knew who she was referring to, and the fact that the man was still hanging around was a problem he hadn't entirely figured out how to handle. "He's still around," Liam replied, his eyes focused on the ingredients in front of him, as if searching for an answer there. "But I'm trying to deal with it. He hasn't come to see me again, which is a good sign, but I don't know how long that will last." Avery felt a wave of concern wash over her. The fear that Liam's past could come back to tear them apart was still present, but she knew she needed to be strong, not just for herself, but for him too. "I trust you," she said, her voice firm, "and I know that together we can get through anything. But if something happens, I want you to tell me. I don't want you to carry this alone." Liam looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and gratitude. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her. "I promise, Avery, I won't hide anything from you anymore." They held each other for a few seconds, and Avery felt the warmth of his body, as if that embrace could dispel all her fears. She knew that even though the ghosts of the past were still lurking, what they had now was stronger. After breakfast, they went out for a walk around town. The weather was cool, with a light breeze coming from the ocean, and the streets of Blue Water were peaceful, as usual. As they walked hand in hand, the locals greeted them with friendly nods, and Avery felt a sense of belonging she hadn't felt before. She and Liam were becoming a part of this place, and that brought an unexpected peace. They walked down to the beach, where the sound of the waves crashing against the sand created a perfect setting for the conversation they both knew they still needed to have. "Do you think we're really ready to face all of this?" Avery asked, looking out at the horizon, where the sea seemed to merge with the sky. "The ghosts of the past, the threats that are still around. I feel like we're stronger, but sometimes I wonder if it's enough." Liam was silent for a moment, reflecting on her words. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but steady. "I don't think we'll ever be fully ready for what life throws at us. But at the same time, I feel like it doesn't matter what comes, as long as we're together. The past won't disappear, and the threats might still linger, but what we have now is stronger than anything that tries to knock us down." Avery looked at him, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. His words were exactly what she needed to hear. Their love, born out of difficult circumstances, was becoming a powerful force, something that could withstand adversity. "I believe that too," she said, smiling sincerely. "I believe in us." They stood there, holding hands, feeling the gentle breeze and the smell of the sea, and Avery knew that, no matter what came next, they would face it together. In the weeks that followed, the closeness between them, Liam was more open than ever, sharing details about his life that he had previously kept hidden, and Avery, too, began to open up more about her fears and insecurities. Their love blossomed naturally, without the tension that had once hung over every conversation. Still, the problems hadn't entirely disappeared. The man from Liam's past remained in town, but he hadn't made any more threatening moves. It was like a shadow lurking in the distance, reminding them that the past was still present, but without taking control of their lives. They had learned to live with that uncertainty, knowing that what they had together was stronger. Liam kept his promise not to hide anything. When the man was last seen at a local bar, Liam immediately told Avery, and they discussed how to handle the situation together. There were no more secrets between them, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, as they sat on Avery's porch watching the sunset, Liam held her hand and looked in her eyes with a gentle but meaningful seriousness. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I thought my past would destroy me, that I'd never be able to leave it behind. But with you, I feel like I can start over, like we can start over together." Avery squeezed his hand, feeling her heart warm at his words. "I feel the same," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "You've given me something I thought I'd never find, a home. No matter what happens, Liam, I'm with you." Their love had become an anchor. Even with the threats and uncertainties, Avery knew they were stronger than ever. There were no more secrets or lies, only the trust and love they had built together. The morning in Blue Water felt too calm for the storm that was about to unfold. Avery woke up with a heaviness in her chest, as if something dark lingered in the air. The town's usual warmth now seemed to mirror her own unease. She got up slowly, the silence around her heavier than usual. The chatter among the locals, the smiles, and even the sound of the waves crashing on the shore felt distant, almost unreal. In recent days, the secret surrounding the accident and her father's role in it had started to spread. Documents that had once been hidden were now being mentioned in hushed conversations, and what was once cautiously discussed had turned into rumors. Her father's name was circulating in conversations in the streets, in cafes, and even at the local markets. Avery could feel the weight of people's stares, as though the burden of her family's actions was falling directly onto her shoulders. Liam, meanwhile, was handling the situation in his own way. He was trying to be strong for her, but Avery could see the conflict in his eyes. The love they had built was being tested in ways neither of them had expected. The pain of the past had returned with full force, and although Liam had never blamed her directly, she knew that her family's involvement in the tragedy was still a deeply painful wound for him. Avery dressed quickly and decided to go for a walk along the beach. She needed air, a moment alone to think about everything that was happening. The town that had once embraced her so warmly now seemed suspicious. People didn't say anything outright, but the lifted chins, the avoided gazes, all of it indicated that something was wrong. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew the truth was about to erupt. As she walked along the sand, feeling the cold wind and the salty scent of the sea, her mind raced. It wasn't just her and Liam's future that was at stake. The repercussions of all this would affect not only their relationship, but also both families and the legacies they carried. Blue Water was a small town, and once secrets were revealed, they rarely dissipated without causing harm. When she returned home, she found Liam sitting at the table, staring at a piece of paper. The tension on his face was clear, and when he saw her, he hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether he should tell her what was coming. "Avery," he began, his voice deep but steady. "There's something you need to know. I received this letter today." He slid the paper toward her, and Avery picked it up with trembling hands. As she read its contents, her heart sank. It was a formal notification the investigation into the accident was being officially reopened, and her father's name was at the center of it. They're reopening the case? Avery murmured, barely believing what she was reading. This could destroy everything, Liam. My family, yours, us. Liam nodded slowly, the pain evident in his eyes. I know. And the worst part is I don't know how this will affect us. I want to stand by you, Avery, but this is becoming bigger than just the two of us. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe deeply, but panic was setting in. The revelation about her father's role in the tragedy had already shaken their relationship. But now, with the whole town involved, with the possibility of a public trial and investigation, it felt like everything was crumbling. This wasn't just a personal issue anymore. It was something that threatened the reputations of their families, something that could leave permanent scars. Liam, what are we going to do? She asked, her voice breaking with emotion. He sighed, standing up from the chair and walking over to her. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, as if that embrace could shield them from what was coming. We'll get through this together. I don't know how, but we will. His promise brought some comfort, but Avery knew that the challenge ahead was immense. They were about to face one final test, something that would not only test their love, but also their ability to trust each other. In the days that followed, the news of the case reopening spread like wildfire through the town. Her father's name was on everyone's lips, and Liam's family, already scarred by the tragedy, was now being dragged back into the center of it all. Avery felt the tension rising, both inside her own home and on the streets of Blue Water. She knew her father was ashamed. What had started as an attempt to avoid financial ruin had turned into a web of lies and bad decisions. Now, he was being called to account for all of it. But what worried her most was the impact this would have on her relationship with Liam. Could he stay by her side when the past they had tried so hard to bury was about to destroy everything? One night, as they sat on Avery's porch, the sky dark and starless, she couldn't bear the weight of the silence between them any longer. She needed to know what Liam was feeling, even if the answer was painful. Liam, she began, hesitant but determined to face the truth. Can you still see me without thinking about what my family did? Or is what's happening going to end up destroying us? He looked at her, his eyes tired but full of sincerity. Avery, I'd be lying if I said this doesn't affect me. Everything that's happening, it brings back so many things I'd rather forget. But what I feel for you is stronger. I'm not going to let our family's past destroy what we have. His words were a relief, but Avery knew the fight was far from over. And if this ends up in a public trial, if the whole town turns against us? Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. If that happens, we'll face it together. I'm not going to let you go through this alone. His words brought some comfort, but Avery knew the road ahead would be hard. Their love was being tested, and even though they were willing to fight, the external pressure was immense. In the days that followed, they faced more challenges. The local media began to speculate about the case. Townspeople who had once been friendly now looked at them with suspicion, and the feeling that everything was falling apart was constant. Still, Avery and Liam stayed together. They decided to take some time away from town, spending more time at the countryside house where they could find peace, away from the judging eyes. There, far from the external pressures, they found a way to reconnect and remember why they were fighting. They walked together, talked about the future, and slowly, the trust they had in each other grew even stronger. In that refuge, in a moment of vulnerability, Liam confessed, I never thought I could go through something like this with anyone. But you, Avery, you give me strength I didn't even know I had. Avery hugged him tightly, knowing that despite all the adversity, the love they shared was real and deep. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to face it together, more united than ever. The gentle afternoon breeze in Blue Water carried with it the scent of salt and damp earth, bringing a sense of freshness and renewal that Avery so desperately needed. The investigation into the accident had finally concluded, and with it, part of the heavy burden she and Liam had been carrying seemed to lift. Her father's name, as well as her grandfather's, had been publicly exposed, but with the investigation came some long-awaited truths that brought a sense of justice, even if belated. Sitting on the porch of her house, Avery gazed at the horizon, where the ocean stretched out endlessly. The peace she always found there was slowly returning, like an old friend who had been away for too long. The scars left by the secrets of the past were still visible, but now she knew that healing was underway. Part of that healing involved forgiveness and, more importantly, forgiving herself. Beside her, Liam sat in silence, holding her hand firmly. They didn't say much, but his presence was comforting, an anchor that kept her steady amid the emotional storm. After everything they had been through, the truth had not torn them apart, but had brought them closer in ways Avery couldn't have imagined months ago. "Do you think the town will forgive us?" Avery finally asked, breaking the quiet between them. She knew they both needed to face what was left of the past, and part of that involved the people of Blue Water. The community, always so welcoming, had been shaken by the revelations. Many looked at her and Liam with suspicion, their families marked by the tragedy and the questionable decisions that had shaped the town's destiny. Liam squeezed her hand, taking a moment to respond. "I think time will help. The people of Blue Water are strong, but they're also fair. They know what happened wasn't your fault, or mine. What matters now is how we move forward." Avery nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. She knew that the town's forgiveness wouldn't come right away, but with time, she hoped they could rebuild, and that the scars left by years of secrets and tragedies would finally begin to heal. In the days that followed, she and Liam made the difficult decision to engage more actively with the community, to face the people of Blue Water head-on. They attended local meetings, participated in community events, and gradually began to rebuild the trust that had been shaken. Nora, as always, was a crucial pillar of support, using her own influence in the town to help soften conversations and show the townspeople that Avery and Liam were willing to face the consequences with dignity. At one of these meetings, held in a community hall filled with locals, Avery gathered the courage to speak for the first time about what had happened. Sitting next to Liam, she could feel all eyes on her, but she decided that she couldn't run anymore. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling with nerves, but her gaze steady. "I know many of you are hurt," she began, her voice stronger than she expected. "I am too. What my family did, their wrong choices affected many of you, and I'm deeply sorry for that. I came to Blue Water to start over, to run away from my own past. And when I discovered what had happened here, I felt like everything was falling apart. But I'm standing here today to tell you that I'm ready to face the consequences. I love this town, and I know the past can't be erased, but I believe we can move forward together." The room was silent, and for a moment, Avery feared no one would speak. But then, a voice rose from the back. It was Mr. Thompson, one of the older residents, who had lost a brother in the accident years ago. He stood slowly, walking to the front of the room. "You weren't to blame for what happened," he said, his voice marked by age, but filled with conviction. "I know your family made mistakes, but I can't put the weight of that on your shoulders. I think what matters now is what we do going forward, and I'm willing to forgive." Mr. Thompson's words spread a wave of relief throughout the hall. More voices began to murmur, and soon, other residents joined in with their support. Forgiveness wasn't unanimous or immediate, but it was a start. Avery felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of relief. She turned to Liam, who looked at her with a quiet smile, as if he had always known this moment would come. In the weeks that followed, life in Blue Water slowly began to return to normal. The storm of rumors and distrust gradually faded, and Avery and Liam continued to rebuild their relationship with the town, but also with each other. They knew there was still much to heal, many wounds to close, but they also knew they were on the right path. One evening, while walking hand in hand along the beach, Liam broke the silence with a question Avery hadn't expected, but that would change everything from that moment on. "Do you think we could have a future here?" he asked, stopping to look at her. Avery looked at him, surprised by the question, but feeling her heart warm at the thought. "I think we're already building a future here," she replied with a smile. "Blue Water is our home now, despite everything, Liam smiled, but there was something else in his eyes. He seemed to be weighing something, a decision he hadn't yet shared with her. He began hesitantly. When all this started, I thought it would be impossible to start over here, that the past would end up destroying us. But now I see that we really can start fresh. Avery nodded, feeling the same. Yes, we can. Together. And at that moment, under the pink-hued sky of sunset, Avery realized that the future they had feared for so long was closer than they had imagined. The scars of the past wouldn't disappear completely, but with Liam by her side, she knew she could face them. The love they had built was stronger than any secret, any tragedy, and that would carry them through whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, their lives continued to blossom. Avery and Liam decided to expand the repair business Liam had started, getting more involved in the town's projects and helping revitalize areas that had been neglected over the years. Their involvement with the community became a form of healing, not just for them, but for Blue Water as a whole. With every gesture, every conversation, Avery felt they were finally... The tough decisions they had to make had made them stronger, and the trust they had rebuilt helped them face each new challenge with more courage and serenity. The future was still uncertain, as it always is, but Avery and Liam were ready. And this time, they knew that together, they could overcome anything. The morning sun bathed the town of Blue Water in a soft golden light, reflecting off the calm waters of the bay. A fresh breeze carried the familiar scent of the sea, wrapping everything in an atmosphere of renewal. For Avery, the town that once represented an escape was now the place where she wanted to stay, where she finally felt she could build something solid alongside Liam. The months of uncertainty and pain were behind them, and the future, though still uncertain, now seemed promising. That morning, Avery sat on the porch of the house she now shared with Liam, watching the quiet street and feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Liam soon appeared, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her, sitting down beside her. There was no need for many words between them. The comfortable silence they now shared was a testament to how far they had come. As she sipped the warm coffee, Avery let her mind wander over the past months. After confronting the past, both the story of her family and with the townspeople, she felt that for the first time, she was truly living. The heavy burden she once carried was lighter now. The healing process was still ongoing, but she and Liam were facing it together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. "I've been thinking," Liam said, breaking the silence as he gazed at the horizon. "Maybe it's time we start something of our own, something bigger. Something that connects us even more to the town." Avery turned to him, curious. "What do you have in mind?" Liam looked at her, a soft smile forming on his lips. "We've already started helping to revitalize parts of Blue Water, but I was thinking we could go further. Maybe open a business together, something that involves the town, something we can call ours." The idea sparked a wave of excitement in Avery. She had always admired Liam's dedication to his work, and the idea of starting something together felt like the natural next step. "I would love that," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Something that's ours, that helps the town grow too." Liam nodded, pleased. "We could think of something that combines restoration and tourism. Blue Water has so much to offer, and if we can revitalize some of the old buildings, maybe turn them into inns or cultural spaces, we could create something big." Avery agreed, and for a moment, she let her imagination wander through the possibilities. Blue Water was a small town, but it was full of charm, and over time, she had begun to see how it could truly become the home she had always sought. There was a growing sense of belonging inside her, something she had never felt before. As they continued to discuss plans for the future, a sense of purpose began to take shape. The town was no longer just the backdrop of their family's past. Now, it was a place where they could create a new story. Together, they had the opportunity to shape that future in their own way, without the shadows that had once surrounded them. In the days that followed, Avery and Liam began exploring ideas for revitalizing Blue Water. They walked through the town, examining old buildings and talking to locals about what they wanted to see revived. Slowly, the plans began to take form. The idea of turning some of the abandoned properties into welcoming inns or cultural centers excited Avery. She saw immense potential not just for herself and Liam, but for the townspeople who were starting to get involved. Nora, always a constant presence, immediately offered her help. Her experience running the inn and her connections around town were invaluable. She had been a pillar of support for Avery throughout the entire healing and adjustment process, and now she was more than ready to be part of this new chapter. "I always knew you two would do something great together," Nora said one afternoon as they discussed the possibilities. "The town is going to benefit so much from this, and it's wonderful to see you both so committed to building something good." Avery smiled, feeling the warmth of Nora's words. The bond between them was deeper than friendship. It was as if Nora had become the maternal figure she never had, someone who supported and believed in her unconditionally. Time passed quickly as the plans unfolded. Liam dove into the details of the renovations, while Avery focused on understanding how they could integrate the town's history into the project, creating something that was both authentic and attractive to visitors. The more they worked together, the more Avery realized that this new beginning was exactly what they both needed. Although the town still bore the scars of the past, the residents began to see Avery and Liam's efforts in a new light. It wasn't just a physical revitalization project. It was an emotional and social renewal. Her family's name, once tainted by the wrong decisions of the past, was now being associated with something positive. And Liam, through his dedication and hard work, was no longer seen as the man marked by his mother's tragedy, but as someone helping to transform the town. Despite the growing enthusiasm and the positive response from the community, Avery knew that the ghosts of the past still lingered. It wasn't something that would disappear overnight. There would always be those who looked at her and saw her family's mistakes, or who looked at Liam and remembered the tragedy. But she also knew that what mattered, in the end, was how they chose to deal with it together. One quiet evening, after another day of planning and work, Liam and Avery sat on the porch of their house, gazing at the starry sky. The silence between them was comfortable as always, but there was something in the air, a sense of accomplishment that Avery felt deep in her heart. "I never thought Blue Water could really become my home," she said, breaking the silence. "When I first came here, everything felt so confusing, so uncertain. But now, I can't imagine being anywhere else." Liam smiled, gently squeezing her hand. "Neither can I. Blue Water has always been my home, but with you, everything feels different. Better." Avery looked at him, feeling the depth of his words. They had been through so much, faced secrets, tragedies, and mistrust. But what they had built together, the love that now united them, was stronger than any challenge. "So, we're really doing this, are we?" she asked, a soft smile playing on her lips. "We are," Liam replied firmly. "We're creating a new story, together." In the months that followed, Avery and Liam turned their ideas into reality. The revitalization project began to take shape, and with it a new phase for Blue Water. The inns began to be restored, cultural spaces took form, and visitors started to see the town through fresh eyes. Avery and Liam had not only found a purpose, but had also established themselves as an essential part of the community. And as they walked hand in hand through the town, admiring the result of their hard work, Avery knew with certainty that they had found more than just a home. They had found peace, redemption, and, most of all, a future where love and trust would be the sun was beginning to set as Avery and Liam walked hand in hand along the beach, feeling the cool sand beneath their bare feet. The sky, painted in shades of orange and pink, created a peaceful scene that mirrored the moment they were living. The sound of the waves gently crashing against the shore was the only noise around, as if all of Blue Water was wrapped in a calm acceptance and renewal that echoed in their hearts. The town, once full of secrets, pain, and distrust, now welcomed them in a completely new way. The revitalization project of Avery's grandmother's house, now the centerpiece of their plan to create something meaningful in Blue Water, was finally taking shape. And with it came the certainty that they were building more than just a physical place. They were rebuilding their lives, their stories, and most of all, their love. Her grandmother's house, once a simple refuge, had transformed into a symbol of everything Avery and Liam had overcome together. With each hammer on the walls and every window restored, they weren't just renewing an old structure, they were healing the emotional wounds they both carried. Their plan to turn the space into a charming inn, welcoming visitors and connecting them to Blue Water's history, was something they both embraced with enthusiasm. The idea that the past could be honored while still leaving space for the future gave Avery a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since she first arrived in the town. As they walked along the beach, heading toward the house that now symbolized so much for them, Avery felt lighthearted, free from the shadows that once haunted her. She turned to Liam, watching his profile illuminated by the soft evening light. There was a peace in his expression that reflected this new chapter in their lives. "Can you believe everything that's happened?" Avery asked, her voice soft but filled with admiration for what they had achieved. Liam smiled, his eyes still fixed on the horizon, but his fingers tightened around hers. "It's hard to believe sometimes. If someone had told me months ago that I'd be here, holding your hand, after everything we've faced, I probably wouldn't have believed it. But here we are." Avery smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder as they continued walking. "I think, deep down, I always knew it was you I wanted to be with. Even when things got tough, something inside me told me it would be worth fighting for." Liam looked at her tenderly, stopping to face her. "And I'm grateful every day that you fought. I never knew I could have something like this, something so real, so strong. What we've built together, it's more than I ever imagined." They stood in silence for a few moments, simply watching the sea and the way the waves came and went, as if dancing to an eternal, unchanging rhythm. The metaphor wasn't lost on Avery. Their love had also gone through highs and lows, moments of tension, fear, and uncertainty. But like the sea, it always returned. It always found a way to renew itself. When they reached Avery's grandmother's house, she felt a mix of nostalgia and anticipation. The renovations were underway, but the basic structure of the house still reminded her of her childhood, the memories of summer visits, conversations with her grandmother, and the warmth that the place always brought. Now, though, it had become something more. The house was being transformed into something new, something that reflected who she and Liam had become. They entered the house, walking through the partially renovated corridors. Liam pointed to a picture on the wall, an old portrait of Avery's grandmother that he had restored and hung with care. "I thought it would be nice to keep a bit of the past here, as a way to honor everything that came before." Avery smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You always know exactly what to do to make everything more meaningful." Liam laughed, pulling her closer. "I've learned from you." They spent some time walking through the house, discussing the next steps of the renovation and imagining what it would look like when the inn was ready to welcome its first guests. The enthusiasm they shared for the project reflected their state of mind. Something new was being born, and this time, without the ghosts of the past holding them back. When they finally left the house, night had already begun to fall. The sky was painted in shades of purple and dark blue, and the first stars appeared. They returned to the beach, walking once again toward the sea, this time in comfortable silence. Avery felt whole, as if all the pieces of her life had finally fallen into place. They reached the water's edge, where the gentle waves lapped at their feet, and stood there, hand in hand, gazing at the horizon. The vastness of the ocean before them seemed to represent the future they had ahead, full of possibilities, mysteries, and hope. The wind played with Avery's hair, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the calm wash over her. "Are you happy?" Liam asked softly, his voice blending with the sound of the sea like a melody. Avery opened her eyes and looked at him. "I am, more than I ever thought I could be." Liam pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as they both watched the sea together. That moment was more than just a happy ending. It was the beginning of something new, something they had built through effort, love, and sacrifice. The past, with all its complexities, no longer defined them. They had overcome the secrets, the pain, and the challenges, and now, what remained was a bright future ahead. "I'm happy too," Liam said, his smile sincere, because for the first time, I feel like I've found my place in the world. And that place is with you." Avery felt tears of happiness well up in her eyes. She looked out at the sea once more, feeling her heart light. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with the person she loved, and nothing else seemed to matter. "Then let's keep going," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Let's build our future together, wherever it takes us." Liam nodded, and together, hand in hand, they gave one last look at the horizon. There were no more secrets between them, no more pain to hide. All that remained was love, trust, and the certainty that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together just as it was always meant to be.